Okay, at this time, Madam Vice Mayor, Madam Mayor has connected to her audio and got her
Hi.
technology all solved.
Can you hear me? Sorry, I was on a Zoom with all the realtors and just got off, and it was nice to see Mayor Edgington from Fernley was there. So it was nice to see him, Mayor Lawson. So I'm having some issues. I keep getting dropped off. So Vice Mayor Weber,
Yes.
are you okay to get us going? And I've got to reboot my internet connection.
Yes, and I don't have an agenda sitting in front of me, so I will call the meeting to order. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
And Madam Clerk can help you with each agenda item. She can call it out so she can lead us into those. Sound good, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Madam Mayor, happy to help.
Okay, thanks, you guys. I'll see you in a minute.
Thank you.
All right, Madam Vice Mayor, as you have called your meeting to order, the first item on your agenda today is the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yes, and I see Councilwoman Breckus has her flags there, so let's go with the Councilwoman Breckus if you'll lead us in the pledge.
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Councilmember Breckus. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Okay, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Madam Vice Mayor, transitioning to roll call for the Reno City Council for today's special meeting, Tuesday, April 13th. Breckus?
Here.
Dewar?
Here.
Delgado?
Here.
Weber?
Here.
Jordan?
Here.
Reese?
Here.
Thank you. He unmuted. And Shivi is absent at this time, but will be rejoining us. Madam Vice Mayor and Council, you do have a quorum of the Reno City Council. Transitioning to your next item today, which is general public comment. This section of our agenda is reserved for items not specific to this agenda. It should be noted there is no general public comment received for today's special meeting regarding the strategic goals and budget. With that, we are transitioning to approval of your agenda. I believe the manager has no changes as there's only one item. So we will look for your motion.
Motion to approve. Second, Dewar.
There is a motion made by Member Jordan and seconded by Member Dewar. Sorry, I'm just trying to get this together here. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimously. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Vice Mayor. Transitioning to your item today, B1, which is presentation and discussion of the City of Reno's strategic goals and priorities and budget for FY 21-22. It should be noted for the record, we did receive one public comment regarding current air quality monitoring from Daniel Ioni. This has been submitted to council and is part of the official record. We have no voicemails, so at this time, I will turn it over to City Manager Thornley for introduction, and then I assume he will volley it to Debbie Lochner.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Doug Thornton, I'm City Manager here in Reno. Madam Clerk is, of course, correct. We had a little bit of trouble, you'll recall, in the first run of budget workshops where we had a power cable cut in an elevator shaft, and we lost power here at City Hall for an extended period of time. And so we missed the first day of those budget workshops that would have provided you with an overview of both the general budget and recommendations therein, and what the projections of revenue in look like from the finance department for the next fiscal year. And so I would like to take some time today and start there. I think it's informative. I think it's important information for the council to have because, of course, it's sort of the reality in which we live. And that helps shape our discussion on which strategic goals we are best able to handle in the next fiscal year. Once we've done that, I think we probably will take a quick break for lunch, but we'll come back and we'll talk about the new strategic plan that was adopted by the council in February of 20. We'll talk about the master plan and the downtown action plan and what the work programs look like to sort of taking those plans off the shelf and putting them into action so that the council can start to shape through staff the community that they envision. So unless there are any questions, I'd love to jump right in and we'll kick it over to our finance director, Debbie Lochner.
I'm great with that. So let's move on.
All right. Good morning, Mayor and council members. Well, Mayor, Vice Mayor, we'll start there. I know she's on her way back. I do have a presentation. As always, feel free to interrupt me as I'm going through. I can't always see you when I'm presenting, but I will share my screen and get right on it. Oops. As soon as the clerk lets me.
Madam Clerk?
We are transitioning options now.
Thank you. Great. All right. So can you see what I have in front of me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Sometimes I see people start talking without actually having it going, so I want to make sure. What we have today is really an overview. We start with the current strategic plan, kind of how our budget's developed, general fund, the strategic investment proposals, our current structural deficit, CIP, and debt. This is a lot of things that we will go over, but very high level. And again, if you have questions, feel free to ask. So this is the overall council's overarching goals for the 2020 to 2025 period. You see at the top in the green, fiscal sustainability. And I have to thank Neighborhood Services for changing the graphics. They used to have that in red, which just caused us all kinds of heartache in finance. Again, public safety, affordable housing, economic and community development, infrastructure, climate change, environmental sustainability, and of course our arts, parks, and historical resources. Overall, for the 21-22 budget, the upcoming budget, we have included a 5.5% increase in property taxes and a 4.5% increase in RC taxes. The 5.5% increase in property taxes is consistent with what the state projected, and the 4.5% increase in C-tax is consistent with what our partner agencies in the region have put into their budgets as well. This budget does fully fund our annual OPEB, our annual contribution to OPEB. It increases our annual funding to workers' comp by 10%, the workers' comp heart-lung by 34%, the risk fund and fleet fund by 10%. And this is consistent with the policies and that we brought forward to council back in December that we work under. These are consistent with filling up those long-term liabilities. In addition, we have increased the healthcare costs by 10% for retirees for both the Reno plan and then 20% for the Hartford plan. And that's consistent with, well, we are not changing the premium cost to anybody. We are just changing, collecting some more money to make those plans more healthy. This budget does also increase our budgeted fund balance from the current year's 12% budgeted fund balance. We increase it to 13%. This is really just kind of the complications of how property tax is calculated in the caps. So you see there's several columns. You have residential and commercial. That is what the actual cap was for each of those years. You see the 10-year average CPI and 2 times CPI. So the general tax cap, which is the commercial, is calculated taking the greater of the 10-year moving average or twice the CPI. Whichever one's greater, that becomes the commercial cap. The residential is and it's capped at 8%. You can see during this entire period of time, we have not reached the 8% commercial cap. And the residential cap is 3%, and it is limited by the general tax or 3%. So you can see in 2017 and 2018, it really was limited by the commercial tax cap. This is, we're finance, we like to show pictures, but when you look historically at property taxes, and I'll show you something, in a couple slides where property tax and C-tax kind of work a little differently. You see the last recession really was hitting us in the 07-08 timeframe, but property tax still went up and it hit a peak in 2010. And then it went down, and it hit the valley in 2014, and then it started going back up. And it took nearly a decade for it to get back to where it was at its peak, but it has surpassed that peak now. C-tax is our most volatile revenue source. It reacts almost immediately to economic conditions. And it has done really well during the pandemic, and that is primarily due to a whole bunch of money coming out of Washington to support the communities in the nation and individual people, as well as additional unemployment, straight direct checks and stimulus to folks. And the city received nearly $47 million that we were able to put out into the community to help struggling businesses and renters. So that has continued to make our C-tax perform better than expected. The Department of Taxation is projecting a 3.45% increase but this is a statewide projection. And we know that in Northern Nevada, we typically trend a little higher. And in discussions with our regional partners, we really, that 4.5% is what everybody's thinking is going to happen in our region. So when you look at C-tax history, the dotted line is the budget. And during the pandemic, you can see that C-tax was only below budget in August. Other than that, it has been above our budget the entire time this fiscal year. You can see last fiscal year where it tanked. This is the chart I talked about, how you can see property tax and C-tax work a little differently. So C-tax is the green line. It hit the peak in 2007, and then as the recession and the economic pressure started, it reacted immediately and it went down. And it hit the valley in 2010. Property tax was still going up, and when it hit its peak is when C-tax was at its lowest. And then property tax started going down and C-tax started going back up. C-tax does grow at a greater rate because it doesn't have the caps that property tax has. So overall, with our general fund, when you look at our revenues, we are projecting about $262 million in overall revenues. And this, one thing I want to point out is when you look at the beginning fund balance in 2021, it's significantly higher than prior years and what's projected for 22. And that is the CARES money that we received in fiscal year 20 that we did not spend until, well, we didn't receive it until fiscal year 21, but we knew how much we were going to get in fiscal year 20. So we had to book it into that year. It all got spent in fiscal year 21, and that's why the revenues in some areas look a little higher, like intergovernmental revenue looks a little higher than normal, because that's where that money got spent, the other half. In addition to that, when you look at this year, this coming year, you can see that we are projecting that our revenues will actually be slightly lower than what they were in fiscal year 20. And that is really a result of the pandemic and continuing to try to manage to that. And when the federal stimulus stops, we really don't know what's going to happen. This slide really is just to show the council what we are using, as far as our assumptions, our assumed growth off of where we are estimating to be in fiscal year 21. For the expenditures, so this is where we have reduced our expenditures as best we could. Salaries and benefits, those are pretty much budgeted based on the CBAs that are in existence. Services and supplies, we have shown a slight increase from fiscal year 20, and that is consistent with what our actual costs are. You look at the transfer to the event center for debt fund, that would be our obligation to back those bonds with C-tax. So we are projected in 21 that we would need about $2.4 million to cover the loss of room tax revenue. And in fiscal year 22, we're expecting that to be about $2 million. But with the new ARPA funds that can cover revenue replacement, we may change how this, once we figure out what the rules are, we are looking at room tax being one of those funds that we would use to replace revenue. You see also down in the bottom, we have a transfer of $3 million to the risk fund. That is to replenish the risk fund for some of the larger lawsuits that we've had to pay out over the last couple years. And then you also see $18 million proposed capital funding plan, which I will get to in a minute. So overall, when you look at our long-term liabilities, the heart-lung was the one I said increased 34%. And you can see that we have not been, this became a split out of our workers' compensation program in 2019, where we actually are keeping track of it separately. We have a long way to go to fund this, this liability. Same with workers' compensation. We fund it, a little, we try to increase it a little bit each year to get up to the point where it's funded. One thing to note on this slide is fleet. This will be the first year where we are splitting the O&M from the replacement costs. Rather than the department getting just one chunk of money for here's your fleet cost for the year, we thought it was important to know how much was to maintain the vehicles and how much was for replacing the vehicles, so that the departments can manage that. If they're asked to cut their budgets, they may want to cut in that area, and understanding what's scheduled to be replaced and what the actual cost is to maintain the vehicles that they have in their fleet. That's a good information for the departments to have. When we look at our overall roll-up of the budget, so that you take your beginning fund balance, add your revenues, subtract your expenditures, actually just revenues, subtract expenditures, but we show that we have a $2.7 million structural deficit in this budget. And that is the best structural deficit since I've been here. It's been incrementally getting smaller. So that's good news. When you look at the fund balance, so we have assigned fund balance of $2 million, and that is typically how much we have to roll over for encumbrances each year. And then the unassigned fund balance that we have budgeted at 13% for fiscal year 22. This is to show just the fund balance history. As if you recall, when we looked at the C-tax and the property tax, and how C-tax really hit its trough in 2010, and then property tax started going down. You can see during that period of time, we also were spending our fund balance to maintain operations. We were down to 2% unassigned fund balance, which is a really scary place to be. It's 8.3% is 1 month's worth of operating. So when you look out we've been budgeting to increase our fund balance 1% a year. Fiscal year 20, the light blue line is a really large line, and that is the CARES grant funding that we received, and also the $7 million that we had council commit to make sure we did not have to cut this current budget. So for the overall strategic investment proposals, this is was the first kind of blush at it based on the city manager's individual meetings with every department director and with the finance department. And really these were the items that were selected to strategically invest into the organization to continue moving the organization forward to help meet the council's goals. So for civil service, we have added a civil service technician that will help enable them to actually take a temporary staff and make it a permanent staff, and stabilize that little department without having the turnover of temps. In community development, what was put in place was an associate planner to really push forward some of our long range planning assignments, Title 18 code updates, master plan updates, and actually starting to implement some of these things. For finance, there is a management analyst for the risk manager for that risk program to help grow that program beyond being, right now it's one person, and he's doing a great job in supporting the city attorney's office, as well as anybody else that needs his help. But he's one person, and so basically has just been doing contract administration so far. But to grow that program, we need to get some help. And then there was a request from the fire department for somebody to do data analysis. And IT put that in as an additional request for their budget. We decided, yes, the city does need a data analysis function. So a management analyst that will do data analytics primarily for public safety. This may or may not maintain in the finance department, but it seemed the most appropriate place to put it. The finance department deals with a lot of data, and we have the ability to support this position. In human resources, we added a HR technician. And this will just begin to help them catch up on some of the backlog and start to move that little tiny department forward as well. For neighborhood services, as a community outreach coordinator, this is a consulting contract that they requested to continue. It was originally paid for with our CARES money, but we have found that it was beneficial. So as a pilot program, we're going to continue it as a consultant to determine whether we really need to bring in a person to do this, or if the consultant works. But this is primarily to outreach to our underserved communities that, even communities that may have some communication issues, whether it be a language barrier or even a cultural barrier. This is that kind of a consultant to help us reach out to those people. For parks and recreation, I'm sorry, this got changed to a tree maintenance workers, but it's supposed to be parks maintenance workers. That is my fault. But the two park maintenance workers, what we originally brought to council was one park maintenance worker, one tree maintenance worker. What got then in discussions with the Parks Department, they really need to hire them in pairs for efficiency and safety. So their highest priority is a park maintenance workers. So we have added 2 park maintenance workers, and we are trying to figure out maybe some tree maintenance workers once we kind of stabilize this budget. For utility services, there were 2 maintenance worker requests there, one for the USA Locates program. This has been increasing, and essentially they have to pull people off of other jobs to do this work because there are time limits and you need to get it done in a time frame. So it's not efficient to have to pull people off of another job to do this work. So it's more efficient to actually hire somebody to do the work. In addition to that, we needed some additional help with the lift station. So a lift station maintenance worker has been added as well. Some additional recommended strategic investments that came from our meetings with y'all at the end of March. So we did hear for public safety, we would like to have some mental health counselors to include with the MOST team. So this is a benefit to the community. It really does enhance our MOST team by providing some more mental health counselors within that unit, and that can serve Reno. In addition, we've added 2 criminalists and a forensic evidence supervisor. This is essentially a placeholder as we continue to have the discussions with council and the county on forensic services. We've added 2 program assistants to help with the clean and safe team, and 2 river rangers, and that really will expand that clean and safe program to provide some additional help there. We have added an ombudsman, yet to be determined on a title, but it's budgeted at a senior community liaison level. And this is really to help take some of the bigger issues the community has had and kind of pull them through the process. And, that would be in neighborhood services to just expand their programs to help the community really navigate the government system. We also have added the funds to update their platform where they collect the information from the community to make it much more efficient, and so they don't have to double enter information into two different systems. This will actually allow them to be more efficient by having the systems talk to each other. Overall, as I said, we do have a structural deficit for this year. It's $2.7 million, or about 1% of our budget. We typically fund the deficits, which we've had for many years, with prior year higher than anticipated revenues, unspent funds, one-time monies that come in. That's how we have been able to balance our budget. And rest assured, the finance department will present you a balanced budget. We just wanted to let you know what our current structural deficit is based on funding everything at the policy levels. So this is our chart on the structural deficit, and you can see that that red line is above the blue line every year. In 2014, they were right on, but we didn't fund some of our long-term liabilities in 2014 in order to make that happen. But essentially, our red line has been above our blue line for this entire period of time, and that is not the way that you should be managing your budget. You really should have the blue line above the red line. So for our capital program for this coming year, the general fund CIP is budgeted at $2 million, which is slightly more than our 1% policy amount. We also have in there the apparatus replacement program, and that's a transfer from the general fund of $2.7 million that goes into the capital fund, and $687,000 that goes into the debt service fund for the medium-term obligation that we got to jumpstart the program. In addition to that, we have a proposed funding plan for the Public Safety Center and the Moana Pool, and this funding plan doesn't jeopardize anything that's in place. So without having a funding plan, the large grants that we have received for those two particular projects could be in jeopardy. Actually, is in jeopardy. So overall, for the two, this is what's going into the capital plan for the coming year, and you can see it's $91 million. Sewer is a very large number. We are, in the midst of the expansion of the plant, which is a multi-year project. So you will see sewer being a large number for a while. And then also street fund is one of our larger contributors to our capital plan every year as well. So for the general capital projects, this is the $2 million coming out of the general fund. We met with a subcommittee and looked at preservation of assets, health safety issues, and economies of scale, primarily to lead our decisions on what we would present towards council. And we also looked at, facilities that had been maybe neglected a little longer than others. So for fire, we are doing some roof upgrades, but you also see we're doing the same roof work in Parks and Recreation. So we think we can get some economies of scale in our bidding for that. We also have maintained the general park maintenance program of $400,000 and the facilities maintenance program of $400,000. In addition to that, there's an additional $200,000 to go towards some upgrades at fire facilities. And then we have some parking lots and driveways where we really wanted to make sure that we could do the ones that are most needed, but also get the economies of scale. So if you are doing parking lots and driveways and pouring asphalt you might as well do them all at once and save some funds. And then the little bit going into the parking meters. So the two projects we have that we are going to present to council tomorrow for the Public Safety Center and the Moana Pool both have large grants from the Pennington Foundation. So the Public Safety Center has a $5 million grant from the Pennington Foundation. And the grant really just requires that the project be completed. So we have a plan on how we can fund the project to completion. And then for Moana Pool, there's a $9 million Pennington Foundation grant, and that grant has specific milestone matching funds needed at specific dates. And so what we have determined was we could do the Public Safety Center in 3 phases over 3 years. The first year being, of course, this current fiscal year. And with the Pennington Foundation, it was really funded in 2 years because that's where the milestones are required. In the first year, this year, by June 30th, we have to come up with nearly $5 million to meet the first milestone. They were generous enough to give us an extension on this. So this is really it. We need to come up with the money and show we're going to move forward with the program. And then the second and third milestone are both due during next fiscal year. So what the finance department has gone through and put together a plan on how we can fund each of these years. So first of all, point out, first year we need just about $27 million, but we have identified $28.5 million. So it's a little bit more than what we needed. So what we have in here is the capital funds available, that $12.9 million, that is money that we have collected as we sold property. The money went into the Public Safety Center project. So far we have $12.9 million in that project fund in order to be able to start building the project. In addition, the capital fund has earned interest that we have not obligated to anything. There were some insurance reimbursements that we received this year, I believe, from the 2017 floods, and maybe some from last year's civil unrest that is not obligated to anything. There was last year when we had council commit $7 million to of the fund balance. That was before we concluded the audit. There was actually $7.6 million. So that $654,000 is the additional fund balance from last year that was not obligated or committed. We have current year expenditure savings that we are expecting, and a good portion of that is from some of our care spending where we didn't spend, we spent it for different things, but when you actually reconcile it, there was some money left over. We did receive reimbursement for our purchase of the Nevada Cares campus from Washoe County and Sparks. That money is not obligated. And then there's some sales of property that is also not obligated. So that is the first year. And we kind of have the same things in the subsequent years. It does look at sales of particular pieces of property. So in the second year, there's sale of property there of, I believe it's a couple parcels that are expected to be sold next year. We have some of the other insurance, and you can kind of see the theme of that. In addition, so the last one where you see the police capital project transfer and the capital tax is about $200,000 a year. Before we left the city hall to go work at home, we were prepared to bring forward a medium-term note for council to consider for the build out of the Public Safety Center. We had built into the budget $1,735,000. So that's the balance of that bottom line in fiscal year 22. It's the amount that we budgeted for the medium-term note that we're retaining in the budget to go towards capital and the capital tax. So this is just lays out how we feel that we could fund those projects with cash over the next 3 years. Overall, when you look at our debt position, This takes us from 2010, where we had a high debt of $627 million, down to where we are now at $439 million. You can see it went up a little bit in 2018. That's when we did the retrack refunding. And then it didn't go down as much as it should have between 19 and 20. And that's where we did the sewer apparatus, the fire apparatus replacement program and the sewer state revolving loan fund bond. So as you can see, it is still $439 million is still the lowest it's been in quite some time. So overall, next steps, we will be bringing the capital project funding plan to you for your discussion and review at tomorrow's council meeting. We really want to get it green lighted so that we can start the projects and make the grantor feel much more comfortable that we are going to take those projects to conclusion. In addition, we have the budget workshops coming up and then the public hearing and adoption. And if there's any questions, I'm so happy to answer them.
Thank you so much. Appreciate all of your hard work and your department's hard work on this. Let's go first to, I'm going to ask that if you want to speak, please push your button, your hands up button. And Devin, Councilman Reese, you're first up.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Lochner. Thank you for the presentation. I might have to go back to a couple of the slide deck slides, just if I do, just let me know. But I want to focus on the structural deficit and the efforts that your department and our council has worked together to, and the entire city, quite frankly, to reduce some of our debt obligations. You made some great points, and I just want to see if we can emphasize them for the public who may be watching about that. I mean, can you first give us an overview, generally speaking, about our path to financial sort of stability and good stewardship? And then second, can you focus on that structural deficit piece? And then third, can you talk again about the ways in which we've reduced our debt? Because you said some really good things, but I don't want them to get lost in the shuffle. Like, I'll give you an example. At one point in time, you said, and I wrote it down, this is the best we've ever been since I've been here. And that makes me very happy. And that tells me that obviously, I have a high degree of respect and confidence in you and really trust your judgment on these things. But I just guess we need to make sure we're highlighting it. So can you help me with those kind of three principal questions?
Sure. So as far as the structural deficit, the city has had a structural deficit for as long, quite some time. I think in 2014, there were a couple accounting gimmicks that actually made it look like we didn't. But the goal really is to have a budget that is resilient, that doesn't have any kind of deficit, that allows the council to invest in the community. We have to get rid of the structural deficit before we can do that. That structural deficit lives with us every year, and essentially it really took the pandemic and holding the budget flat last year to get us to the position where we are this year, because our revenues continue to grow even through the pandemic, but we held it flat, and that, I think, made a huge difference. What we had been seeing up until this year was somewhere between $5 and $7 million as structural deficit. The finance department always brings the council a balanced budget, so we do comb through and pull things out and bring you a balanced budget. But I thought it was very important to just have the discussion overall of where we reside when you just purely put everything together according to policy and the plans, and really what that sits at. It's $2.7 million, 1%. That's not as hard to deal with as, 6, 7, 8 million that we were looking at a while ago. So, that having a little fiscal discipline will allow us to be able to move the organization forward and start to do some of the things that we want to do with more comfort. So when you talk about our debt position, one of the, I like to say this, one of the things the city made me do when I applied for this job was read their CAFR cover to cover. Whenever I read a CAFR, the first thing I look at is debt. I mean, that is the first thing you really look at, because it's the one thing that you can really make a difference working your debt. So when I read that and I saw the city had 2 bond instruments that had derivatives associated with them, and those derivative instruments were part of Orange County going bankrupt back in the day. And I worked for county government in California when that happened. So my entire career, I've been looking at, never going that direction. So I came into a city that had derivatives. One of the first things to do is to get rid of them, if possible. We had one that was on a daily reset, and you can imagine the accounting nightmare of trying to manage a daily reset of your rate, your bond rate. So working with some of the, with Goldman Sachs and Bank of New York, who held the retract debt, mostly with Goldman Sachs, who was not getting any payments off of that. This was a debt that is covered with a special tax the community put in place to pay for it. But the trajectory of this particular piece of debt was it was never going to get paid off, and that tax would never sunset. So we took it upon ourselves to come up with a solution. And while we had to extend the debt out farther, and we paid cost of issuance, so it made it look like our debt position increased, we're able to actually pay it down. So our debt position is decreasing rapidly as we're able to make those principal payments that we were not able to make before. We had a similar situation in the event center bonds, and we've, well, those are backed with room tax, so it's a little bit more difficult. With this new ARPA funds, we are likely going to be able to replace those lost room tax revenues and be able to really keep that on track without having to use RC tax. And then what we will be bringing forward to you, I believe on the 28th of April, is redemption of a sewer bond. So that will be paying off another $18 million of our debt using cash. So we really are looking at that on a continual basis to make sure that the city's in the best position, refunding things as we can. The federal government's about to put back in place the advanced refunding tool. So that will give us one more tool to continue to manage the city's debt position and try to get that paid down to a level that the council's much more comfortable with.
Thank you, Ms. Lochner, and thank you, Councilman Reese. I want to ask before we go to the next speaker or the next council member, is this how we want to do this? I don't know if we want to spend as much time, but we do need the answers of our questions. So I want to look to you all and see if we need to have time limits, or we ask the question and then Ms. Lochner responds. Is there any appetite? Does anyone want to kind of chime in and suggest an idea? Councilwoman Breckus?
I did have a question about process. The first slide in Ms. Lochner's presentation was our strategic plan. And it appears that the strategic plan workshop part of this is after lunch. Is that right?
Right.
Okay, so I won't ask questions on that. I just know that it informed the rest. Then maybe if we could just let this go until 11:45 and then break till 12:15 maybe.
Right, but let's make sure that we can get through some of these questions. And let me go over real quickly to Ms. Jordan. Thank you so much for that. Not Ms. Jordan, Ms. Dewar. Council member.
This is on the process. I think we just want to get some answers. So I think you just let Debbie answer, and okay. Now's the time. And I don't plan to have a lot of questions myself, so I appreciate it. The answers are lengthy and they're specific, and that's what we need. So
that's exactly right. Thank you so much. And we'll do that, and we'll check in for lunchtime at the appropriate, 45 minutes or so from now. Thank you, Councilmember Jordan. You're next up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I am just want to give a shout out to Deborah clearly, this is probably the first, we've all been waiting in a lot of these meetings to get some of the data behind what is happening, what are the projections, where do we sit, and where do we view where we might sit in the future. And this is probably the first meeting where, I don't know about the rest of you, but kind of taken a sort of breath to kind of say, all right, the ship made it through some of the toughest waters, through some incredible leadership from you, Deborah, and from our city manager and all the directors who made some very strategic decisions early on that were not fun but were necessary, and the city is better for it. So just kudos to you and your expertise, and the strategic decisions that you have made have really put this city and its finances on pretty solid footing. So just my appreciation for your professionalism through it all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Did you have any other questions?
I didn't. I got very excited about the slide that included the social workers and the river rangers, and that's exciting for a number of reasons. One, because it's responsive to what we're hearing from the community, and it's responsive to what this council gave direction on. I will say, not has the translation of what we have voiced as our priorities always translated into the next presentation of the budget. And in this case, it did. So kudos to the city manager and you for that as well. So that slide probably excited me the most. And the structural deficit reduction. Anytime you hear structural deficit, it makes people kind of go, well, wait a minute, there's a deficit. Well, comparatively to 6, 7, 8 million down to 2.7, we're making significant progress, and that's pretty exciting too. But thank you. I don't have any questions. I thought she did a great job.
Thank you. Thank you so much. The next step is Councilwoman Breckus, and Councilwoman Dewar, you'll be next. I don't know if you raised your hand. I can't tell if you're the next speaker, but yes. Councilwoman Breckus, go ahead.
Thank you. So I do have a few questions. First of all, I kept hearing in conversations with you last year and Mr. Thornley that from the CARES Act money, there was some money that was going to not be spent, and then we could roll back into the budget. I'm not talking about the ARPA, I'm talking about the CARES Act. Where on the slides does that roll over?
So if you look at the capital funding plan in the first year, there's some unspent money in that year. That's some of that is CARES money.
Could you bring up that slide?
Yes, please.
Give me a minute to find it.
Can I just make a suggestion? Page numbers would have been great, because I noticed on the slide deck too, there doesn't appear to be page numbers, which makes it tough to reference back. So,
Actually, there are page numbers. They're in the
They're
section.
I'm sorry, they're not on the slide deck though. I'm sorry. Which we haven't seen yet.
So this one's page 37 of the slide deck.
So where is this CARES Act money?
If you look at the current year expenditure savings, $6 million.
Let me, I'm sorry, is it under available funding options? Oh,
Yes, so it is the third from the bottom.
Okay, and that's 6 million. How does that translate into the budget workshop? That's just a slideshow, going forward, but where's that living in the budget this FY and next FY?
So at this point, this is all money that is unappropriated from council for this purpose. So all the money that we have listed here exists, but council has not appropriated it for anything other than what's in the capital.
Where's it sitting right now in this FY budget?
It's just sitting in cash. It's not in the budget because council has not appropriated it. So for example, the reimbursement we received from Washoe County and Sparks, $7.7 million. That's just money we received. but it hasn't been appropriated by council to be spent.
Okay, so this 6 million, I mean, we spent a lot of time on those buckets with the 35 million on CARES Acts. And this 6 million never went into any bucket anywhere?
It was originally obligated in those buckets, but not necessarily spent by the timeframes.
Okay, so that's really what I'm trying to understand is we spread out this 6 million to different buckets, and those buckets didn't go. Could I see an accounting of where this 6 million is coming from, of what buckets?
Yeah, it's not all 6 million is not CARES, but I do have a final reconciliation of the CARES funding that I can send out to council.
I think that would be useful, because I would like to know that. And then, is that the only place of CARES Act money you're proposing to roll over, or is there more from this than this?
No, we did a really good job spending the money.
Okay. I guess the other question I have besides that and on the strategic plan is, under your strategic investments, could you bring up the slide that showed, obviously 2 weeks ago we had 3 days. The first day was, I guess, this, and the second day we had participation, and you said you heard from us certain directions we'd like in terms of what you're calling strategic investments, but what I'm calling our personnel additions. To the staffing complement, they're investments because they're people we're investing in to get the job done. But, and here's where I'm struggling is, we seem to be adding, and I think I counted that based upon those 2 days of budget hearings, you were adding 9 people in addition to the others rolling out in the budget. And then I've also noted tomorrow that I think there's 7 or 8 coming in on the building enterprise. So I'm looking at 20 positions being added this FY. And I am seeing it go under the existing organizational allocation that the manager, inherited and hasn't. I mean, he's obviously asking for an ACM in their straight budget, which, I haven't seen how that is going to allocate and then fall down. But I'm concerned about adding positions and not really knowing the overall allocation. And I'll just be very concrete in my examples. Number one is this management analyst. A lot of people want data to be accomplished by someone, somewhere, something. And I'm hearing, police wants it, fire wants it, managers, it just doesn't seem to me where it's going. This ombuds person, is it a customer service function? I just see a lot of, I don't see an overall structure to plug in some of these things. And I'm really struggling with adding 20 positions, which is more than we've ever added. And then I will bring on the, obviously the fire positions on the SAFER grant. I'm really not seeing the big picture, and maybe we'll get to that on the strategic plan, but I'm seeing a lot of positions plug in, and I'm not seeing the overall organizational strategy advancements explained. So that's an issue I'm having.
Good comments. Questions. I don't know if there's a response to that now, but I do know that we will be expecting to receive the final CARES Act spending from Ms. Lochner. So, okay, moving on. Councilwoman Dewar, and please in the future, will you raise your hand? We need to start raising our hands.
What do you mean? You mean
the one on that you do from,
I can't find the raise the hand.
well, it's okay. Go ahead and go
Okay,
ahead and
I'm
go
sorry.
forward using
Today,
that.
whatever. I can't find it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. Just a couple quick questions. First of all, I wanted to compliment the manager because often when budgets are proposed, the groups that get them short shrift are those that work across the organization. Often I see the support groups that don't quite have the level of advocacy. And that is like let me use a specific example, whether it's a civil service technician or, a management analyst on risk. I mean, to use the word, they're a little bit unsexy, right? But they're critical to the operation of the organization. And often I see that in most organizations, they have a hard time funding these support positions because there's no one person advocating for them. It's spread across the organization. So first of all, I wanted to say kudos on that. Number two, I do think that when we look at this, we do need to look at all the positions together. So I felt like we needed to look at these ones that are general fund, sewer fund, et cetera. But we also need to look at the ones that are the BFAC. And then we also need to look at the SAFER grant so that we have an overall understanding of it, you know, regardless of funding source, what we're doing. And I guess it's a different way of kind of saying what the previous council member was talking about with the org chart. It's just, it's good to look at them all together so that it's not quite so piecemeal. But secondly, I want to compliment that we're actually looking at the BFAC funds to support the activities that are appropriately supported out of that. I noticed that it was proposed to also have a reduction in the building permit fees is what I thought I read at the same time. So I thought, because obviously we've built up an excess in there. And so all those things made sense to me. I wanted to congratulate on coming forward with a funding plan for these big capital projects, which include, you know, the police station, which we all made the commitment to. We bought the land, you know, we made some plans, but we haven't quite been able to move forward on them. The Moana pool, which we've received countless letters, and I congratulate our community for coming forward on that. Because they're expressing their will. They want a pool and they want it sooner rather than later. And we don't want to lose the 9 million from Pennington. I was extremely excited to see this ombuds person because I think it's worked pretty well at Tumwa, which 3 of us sit on. And what I do question is whether it should be a staff person or more of a third-party consultant. I think the more independence the person has, the better. But at the same time, the best way to solve a problem in an organization is to understand the organization, right? Know where to go, know who to call, know the people. So I would like to see them treated much like the auditor, where they report directly to the manager so that it's not a filtered, I don't even know if it should be in community development. If you see what I mean, I'm looking at the independence of the role, but also knowledge of the organization. So just a thought about where it lives. I thought that we were talking about consolidating public records with our clerk, and I wasn't sure if I heard that addressed here today, but we could come back to that.
Yeah, that's a pretty, it's a longer analysis that we need to do, that we need to bring back. There's a couple areas in the organization that we want to look at consolidating and maybe centralizing, but we have to do a much more thorough analysis, and it won't be ready for this budget.
This is, again, when we say consolidating, just for those, that is probably code for not having, let's say, the police do their own, fire do their own, the central departments work through the clerk. I think it's best that everybody work through the clerk. And then just one more question on public works. I know we had conversation at a previous meeting, I guess it was during the budget, about where I'm a little bit confused, and I hope we could explain it a little bit better to me. It could be offline, about whether we're going with an assistant public works director or how we're organizing the utility stuff. I mean, we started talking about it on the budget. But I don't know that I felt like I got resolution. I thought it was really good, and we all voted to stand up a utilities section dealing with sewer, maybe roads, maybe water. I saw it on our strategic planning workshop later, talk about water management. I wasn't really sure where that fit, or if water meant wastewater. I wasn't really sure. So I'm raising questions that I'm not necessarily looking for answers right now, but just saying, I hope that we get answers through the next few weeks before we have to make votes on anything. I'd like to get some of these things a little bit better fleshed out. And then finally, a shout out to Debbie. I've said it the entire time you've been here, your approach to debt is fantastic. I've spent hours and hours and hours with you to make sure that I fully understand it. And you are a very good explainer, and you have been very patient and spent the time with me. You know, looks can be deceiving. You know, the things that you're doing to reduce our debt position, what you talked about in terms of the interest rates, the resetting daily, weekly, monthly, all that I think is really, really good. And that story needs to be told over and over and over again. So more commentary and some future questions than on the spot need for answers.
So just one comment on that, this budget does still have a utility director in it. So that is still contemplated to happen. That just didn't happen this year because we ended up with, a new city manager and need to really understand the organization before we move forward with setting up a new department.
Well, is that what's under utility services sewer fund? Or
Yes.
I thought those were maintenance workers, I thought when you told me.
They are maintenance workers, but sewer fund uses maintenance workers.
Right, but what I'm saying is when you say it's in the budget, do you mean
so we do have a
established last year, but you expect to fill it this year? Is that what you mean?
We established it with last year's budget. It's this current year is the first year it was in the budget, and it is retained in next year's budget. And it's really just a matter of allowing our city manager to work through, what that looks like. And we do need to do a little bit more work in the splitting. As you recall, I think it was Councilmember Breckus that pointed out they had pieces of people. We really need to separate it and make it specific. This person's there and that person's there. So there's a little bit more work to do.
I think it would help. I agree with that. Just clarity.
Yeah.
And job duties and
there's
forces and
we have a little bit more work to do, and we recognize that, but we have got the budget at least split so that we can begin that work.
okay.
Thank you so much. Councilwoman Breckus, I see your hand.
Yeah, I mean, just continuation of that, park rangers or river rangers. I've seen, we've talked about that before, and it looks like you added that based upon our 2 days of budget hearings from 2 weeks ago. But I'm still trying to understand. You said it goes to the safe, clean, and clean team, which I think clean and safe team that it lives in the manager's office. But then rangers are usually post-certified people, and we've also discussed that they'd be in parks. So I'm trying to understand. And I keep hearing that, and I support it, that the county's going to be more, we're going to have an MOU where they will be running the shelters, and we'll be able to do more of the street level work, which is good, so I support addition if we're doing that. But if that agreement doesn't materialize, then, how do we do both? So again, I'm thinking that some of the specifications jump over some of the bigger questions and organizational, situations that need to get worked out before we plug in the resources. And maybe, for me to have comfort, rather than just plug bodies that immediately move into recruitments, get some of these big picture things. And maybe we'll get that in the second half of today, but I think some of the big picture questions need to be answered before we start opening up recruitments if this budget is adopted in this fashion.
Thank you. Let's see. I'm seeing that there's a second hand raised.
Councilmember Jordan.
Okay, thank you. There it is. It's blending in. Thank you. Go ahead, Councilwoman Jordan.
Thank you. And I don't know if this is the right time where we discuss some of these specifics of the positions, but Councilwoman Breckus brings up some valid points about how sort of all of the things begin to meld together with the transfer of, homeless services and the shelters going over to the county. I will say this, while there has been tremendous progress and an MOU coming forward, as I understand, fairly soon, I don't envision that transfer would likely happen in its totality within the next 12 months, within our next fiscal year. So just keeping that in mind, while the steps will begin, I don't know that they will be completed before our fiscal year is up. So just keeping that in mind.
Thank you. Are there other questions? I don't see it. Let me ask one question.
Both.
Then I'll go.
I found the raise my hand and I'm raising it.
Okay, good. I see it raised. Councilwoman Jordan, did you have more questions?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to ask a quick question, if I could, Councilmember Dewar, and then I'll go right to you. On the forensics, I know we commented on it. Is that going to be discussed more in our strategic planning?
So it's a thing that we can definitely discuss later in the meeting, but the general overview is that the issue continues to be negotiated with the county. At the end of the day, sort of having control over our own destiny in that space and making sure that as the program is stood up in Reno, we can do it not as an emergency, but as a targeted strategic event. Sort of lends itself to us including those positions in this budget.
Well, I think there was questions asked when we previously spoke about this, and I feel like it's just moving forward, and I would like to have that conversation in strategic planning. I don't know that we all supported that and wanted to make sure that we have full discussion on it. So I hope that we do that in our strategic planning part.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Councilmember Dewar.
Yeah, a couple quick questions. I too had Rangers for my next round. This is something that I too have advocated for a long time. I thought that they were going to be basically, like, in other words, work in parks, but have a higher level of training, such as police training, much like a park ranger would in a national park, a state park, that kind of thing. So I'd like to get some clarity on that too. Question on the forensics, since you brought it up, Vice Mayor, is I think it would help us to have an analysis of how other cities do it. I mean, I'm sure there's a million ways to organize on the subject of forensics. I think where we ended up last time was we thought we'd get better, more targeted services for a cheaper price, because we wouldn't have certain activities that the county has to do that we don't necessarily use, is kind of where I summarized where we ended up. But it would be good to get some different models for how forensics is done, even in the South, for example, Southern Nevada. And then two questions. One is, Debbie, do tell, how do we fix a structural deficit? I mean, how do you go about doing it? I mean, you've pointed it out, we have one and have had one, but how do you fix it?
So the best way to fix a structural deficit is to not add more expenditures to your budget. You are limited by your revenues. And so again, there are expenditures added into this budget that are ongoing that, if we held flat, I'm not sure if we would be structurally balanced, but we would be that much closer. The issue is that really what we looked at is making sure that what we do invest into the organization is targeted so that we can move the organization forward and accomplish some of the things that we're trying to accomplish, rather than spinning our wheels. So some of that does require some additional positions, because I can tell you, quite frankly, most of our staff is tapped out. And so in order to continue to move the organization forward, to work on these strategic plans and implement the plans that we have and not let them sit on a shelf, we need some additional help to do that.
So the short answer is spend less.
Spend less.
Okay. All right. So spend less to the extent that we can and still get our job done, and even begin to meet the expectations of our public, who we work for, who do have expectations about the cleanliness of their parks, for example, when they go there, or the fact that they call us up and want information and they get conflicting information, or they get no information. They don't know who to call. I mean, I think that's why you have two people here, one doing data analysis and one the ombuds person. I think you're speaking to the public. You're saying we want to make our government more accessible and understandable to the world and more transparent. So I think those are really good things.
Yeah, and as we become much more data driven, there's a lot of data comes into us, but it just kind of sits there. So having somebody, when you ask for information, having somebody being able to actually pull data, analyze it, and give you some good information is where we are now. We have it kind of scattered throughout the organization, but not just somebody that's can really be in charge of it and making sure that that we've got, can reach out to the departments and be the central person.
Just a thought on that. So at one point in my life, I managed a 200-person data collection group. So they collected data about science, right? Water and all these parameters and 8,000 stations. And we had a phrase there. We called it data rich and information poor. So we had lots and lots of numbers, and we had little way of transforming those numbers into any kind of understandable metrics or information that we could then take action on. And so one thing I just want to advise is that what I found was I actually ended up having to get PhDs to take the data, which was collected by lower level staff, and actually understand what it all means and put it together. So you may want to think about the level of this person. I'm sure you need several, but I ended up needing several PhDs to make sense of it all, and put it in language that both scientists could understand, but also regular people can understand, because lots and lots of people were looking over our shoulder, right? They want to know, why are we spending so much time collecting data and what are we doing with it? And it has to be understandable. So there's a communication piece, there's a reporting piece. And so I just a caution, and it's a point of information on that. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any other council members with questions? Okay, then I guess we'll go back. Oh, Councilman Reese.
Sorry, Madam Vice Mayor, I couldn't find my hand raised quick enough, so I was trying to hold that. It's challenging. Deborah, I guess I want to sort of focus on the CIP part, and this may not be fully fleshed out today and in this conversation, but just use this as an example: the pool and the funding for the Moana pool, which is coming up on our agenda tomorrow. Your budgeting process has allowed us a way forward on that very important topic. And for my part, I am excited to hear my colleagues' thoughts tomorrow about this issue, but I also think it's worth mentioning here as it relates to my hope that we can actually build a second pool and hopefully a third pool. We're under-resourced in various parts of our community as it comes to recreational services largely. And so while I view the importance of the structural deficit being reduced, and I appreciated your comment to my good colleague, Councilmember Dewar, about how do we close that gap, and it's like holding the line. Obviously, a city is not a business enterprise, and we shouldn't treat it as such, meaning we're not necessarily going after the same goals in terms of budgeting priorities. We're trying to be good stewards of the resources we have. And I, in my own world, would like to see us get closer to that zero out number. But I also know that if we delay some of the staff needs we have, we're really cutting, off our nose to spite our face. I also believe that if we don't do things like occasionally we bond an item because we know it's a necessary component. So I guess ultimately my question for you relates to that. I mean, one pool is awesome. It's long overdue. I learned to swim in the Moana pool, but I think there are pools needed in other parts of the community, especially in the southeast part of Reno. I just would like to see us have a robust way forward. And your building of this budget, are you taking into account that sort of continual capital need?
So one of the things I talked about, that $1.735 million, at the end of the 3 years, we are planning to push that into our regular general capital program so that we'd have a $4 million program instead of a $2 million program. In addition to that, through the city manager's office, we have several teams of executive directors working on various strategic plans, a long-term staffing strategy, an overall long-term infrastructure plan. There's a lot of things we need to do. We haven't planned, so we've grown, but we actually haven't planned or reacted to that growth in a strategic manner. So we're working on several plans to get to where we can have steps to move forward towards having a long-term staffing strategy is going to be huge for us.
I think that was why we were combining your presentation with our strategic plan discussion. I mean, you can't have one without the other. So I appreciated the linking of them. I wasn't intending to have a deep dive in like line items about CAFR elements or anything like that. I've reviewed it, but I thank you for your response. And I think it does answer my question. And it just continues to highlight for me what I think is the important for us, or the important point for electeds. And that is simply that, you know, we have to be good stewards of the resources we have. We also have to, in my opinion, we need to divorce ourselves from the idea that, you know, a government should be run as a business. We are not a for-profit making enterprise. I think there are important points of budgetary and fiscal concepts that are applicable in the government world, but it is not the same. And so sometimes it can be short-sighted to just say, you know, let's race to the zero-based budget, or let's race to that thing without thinking about the impact on our community. So I appreciate your comment, and thank you for answering so specifically.
Thank you so much. I see your hand is raised, Councilwoman Dewar.
Yeah, thank you. Just one last thing I wanted to mention, and it's something that we haven't actually talked about, and hopefully we will talk about in the strategic planning part. And that is this whole issue of sustainability. It's one whole leg, you know, one whole section of our strategic plan for the whole time I've been on council. We have one person doing it. It reminds me of how we've had to deal with homelessness with one person or one or two people dealing with CDBG. We need to get 2 positions filled, in my opinion. We need to be talking about it. We didn't adopt the sustainability part of Title 18. I'm sure, again, we're going to get to it in the next part of this program, but so many people have come up to me and said, we had a great start. We adopted a sustainability plan, but they've been disappointed that we essentially put it on the shelf. And I know our manager is looking at the various plans that we have adopted, the Downtown Action Plan, the Reimagine Reno plan. Well, we adopted a sustainability plan, and we did major steps on it, even back in 2014, 15, 16, in terms of the mayor signing on to the climate change. Here's my concern. It's a issue of time. Climate change is waiting for no woman or man. It is just inexorably happening. And we need to be there to meet it where it's happening. You know, the snowpack's already changing, the rivers are changing how they're functioning, whether we do anything about it or not. It should be threaded in with our building right now. Like all this building that's happening, if it all happens and they're not doing the rewiring for the, to support the electric cars, or we're not talking about where solar fits, or I've heard some rumblings about gas, or we just had all these backups on waste management, for example, over this last week or two, lots of complaints coming to me with dumping at transfer stations or lack thereof. In other words, these things are going to happen whether we prepared for them or not, whether we want them to. And what I don't want to do is miss this whole housing bubble. I'll call it that right now, for lack of a better word. Tremendous amount of housing being built. And if we don't have the standards in place, then it's just going to be built like all the other housing. But I am inspired because I saw you have a person, Mr. Manager, to work on Title 18 stuff, and or the parking lot, let's call it. But the building codes, I don't think live in Title 18. I think the building codes live in another title. And do you see what I'm saying? Like all this stuff's being built, but we aren't rewiring. We're not talking about LID. We're not talking about lead efficiency. We aren't having those conversations because we haven't adopted any requirements, to my knowledge. We've said we've done lots of good plans, but they're sitting on shelves right now. So it's just something to think about. Maybe there's a different way to get it done, but I just want to make sure we don't miss this opportunity where all the houses get built, and then after they're built, we come in with the brand new standards. You see what I'm saying? And then they don't really become effective because there's no more building after this big building boom, of the next, let's say, 2 to 5 years. So something to think about.
I understand. I would offer that I do think what you're describing as it relates to sustainability and housing, there's probably a place for that discussion as we talk about Title 18, even though the building code does live in a different place. I would offer too, though, that is sort of one component part in a much broader ecosystem, as you know, of sustainability. And so while it may be something that we can move and implement comparatively quickly, a broader plan will take more time. Right?
Well,
Putting
and
it
I
into
saw
action.
that reading ahead, the stuff you sent us, I read it all. And I saw that that was out several years, like 2023, I was seeing stuff. And, you know, the legislature did a lot on solar, and, you know, there was all this drama, there were lawsuits with PUC, the legislature went in to fix. We're allowed to do community solar. And I'll just give you an example. A affordable housing developer came to me and said they were interested. And I said, how about doing our first community solar as part of your project? Because remember, community solar helping lower income people have access to this kind of electricity. Like, let's do it now together. I don't, you know, so I initiated the conversation. They're thinking about it. They're going to see if they can work it in, maybe get grants on that. But just some thoughts that I don't want to wait for several years. Like, they're building it now. So, all right, thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, then I'll return it back to you, Mr. Manager, and see where we go from here.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Vice Mayor. It is 11.
I just wanted to say thank you so much to Debbie and her team, Ms. Lochner and her team. Just great job, good presentation. Wish we could have seen it before, but we got to see it now, so it's even better. So thank you. Thank you so much for all the hard work. Okay, sorry about that, Mr. Manager.
No, not at all. I would echo those sentiments. Debbie and her team are incredibly important to our organization, and this time of year is very, very busy for them, as you all know, and they have just it is a Herculean lift to get all of this information out and together and explained in a way that is digestible and understandable by everyone. And so I'd echo everyone's sentiments in extending compliments for this work product. It is 11:30 on the nose. We had planned to stop at 11:45. I cannot get through the slide deck in 15 minutes, and I don't know if you want to take a break after the slide deck or if you just want to move this up now and come back at noon.
I think we should go now and come back at noon.
Yeah.
I think that's right.
Everybody
So-
else agree with that?
Yep.
Okay, I think that's
All
the
right.
best.
See you in half an hour.
Okay. we are. And Madam Mayor.
Someone else is running the meeting. What?
Madam Mayor and Council, if you would like to call your meeting back to order, you may do so.
Thank you. Madam Mayor, I will move forward. Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order and we'll go to Mr. Manager.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Mayor, members of the council. Doug Thornley, City Manager, for the record. I'm going to share my screen real quick and we'll get into this slide deck. Good to go with the slide deck?
Yep.
Yes,
All right.
it's a great
Well,
picture.
I've heard from a number of you. I think you've all lamented at one point or another that we have these fantastic plans that staff and consultants and the council have put a tremendous amount of effort into, and they sit on a shelf and collect dust. And I don't think that Reno is necessarily unique in that nature. But coming out of a global pandemic and having seen the results of economic diversification in the region, we really are at a point where it's time for some action. These aren't new documents in terms of the strategic plan or the master plan. And so I don't believe that now is the time to rewrite them or necessarily even reprioritize them, but it takes discipline to put our fingers on the proverbial scale and move the community forward. And so we'll run through what that action plan looks like, and then we'll open it up for feedback on what's working and what's not. I've been here a little more than 6 months now. I think we have an incredibly talented team. We work really hard. We turn out high quality work product. But in general, I think we struggle confusing urgent things for important things. And both staff, the manager's office, the council, I think we'd be well served to use the plans in front of us to frame both our decision making and target our work and make sure that we have a work plan that is in fact moving the needle in the direction we want it to move and not just work for work's sake. And so while nobody, you see the end there, nobody rises to the occasion like we do, we haven't done the best job of understanding the opportunity cost that we expend when we fail to target our work. And so what does that mean? What that means is, I think all of us, the council, the manager, the staff here, we believe in the mission and we all want to tilt the room for the city of Reno. But we need to connect our values, our plans, and our goals with our behavior, which is our decisions and our prioritization of work. We need to be cognizant of the goals that are laid out in these plans when something crosses our desk so that we can make sure that we're continuing to work towards those goals. You know, there's sort of a quick way of saying it, and I'm sure everyone's heard it, but if we're not actively working towards our goals, we are inherently working away from them. Here's how I think of things that cross my desk in terms of prioritizing their importance in a given day. And I think that this is a really good framework for looking at things and opportunities that come to us. The base obviously is stable revenue in. You heard Ms. Lochner talk about that earlier today in terms of building a resilient budget. What that means is finding a place where we can deliver high quality services and knowing what that means in terms of revenue expectations, and building a budget where we can continue to deliver those high quality services even in times of perhaps more austerity. The next one up is opportunity. That's where we can start to expand our space in terms of services we provide to the community, in terms of new things we take on. We then get into finding efficiencies. And then right at the top of the pyramid, I think is where the council and all of us here as staff would like to live. And that's making those impactful programs, making sure that the community is moving forward at a pace and not staying stagnant, and building a thing that lives on beyond all of us. It's a continuum, of course, for any given day, right? It's not just a ladder you climb. It's a thing that goes up and goes down. Obviously, it is styled heavily after Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and a good way of thinking about it is everybody needs food, but if the room you're in is on fire, the food is going to have to wait. And so you go down to the base level, the lowest level in the hierarchy, and you attack those issues first. I also think it's a great visual for the message that Ms. Lochner just gave you, which is that we have to do the foundational work well before we can move on to the more exciting things. And we need the discipline to see it through. This is the second time today you've seen this graphic. What's important here is that we have 6 tier 1 strategic plan priorities and 7 tier 2 priorities. They are not things that we take necessarily in order. We don't just check things off the list and go down to the next one. And I am thrilled to tell you that we are making considerable headway on many or most of all of those priorities. So for example, we are in the middle of an operational audit at the police department so that we can better understand our needs in terms of public safety over there. We are working diligently on comprehensive fiscal sustainability. Again, the front end presentation you saw in this meeting outlined a lot of those efforts. Housing affordability is a thing that is at the top of everyone's mind. And as we talk about transitioning away from the sheltering responsibility and having the county take that over, we will open up a number of opportunities in terms of our ability to effectuate housing changes here in Reno and the region at large. The downtown action plan, of course, is a thing that I think you've all read ahead and you've seen is coming later in the slide deck. But that will be critical too, finding a reason for people to be downtown, making sure that those spaces are activated and that our community is using the parks and the river that we're so proud of is incredibly important to our long-term success here in Reno. Homelessness and regional fiscal equity, there are a number of ways that we can talk about that. I think you've all been on the cutting edge of what we're doing there. We're going to talk about the CARES campus. We're going to talk about forensics at the sheriff's office, and we're going to talk about how all of these things interplay in terms of regional fiscal equity in the delivery and provision services. The tier 2 priorities, the council called out the Public Safety Center by name. We've talked a bunch about that today. We're going to talk a bunch about it tomorrow. Implementing the master plan is, of course, incredibly important because that's where the action happens. That's how we really can shape the community that the council envisions over the next 20 years. You won't be surprised to learn that all the work that went into that master plan has resulted in a number of excellent suggestions and strategies on how to implement it. But there are enough of them that we're probably going to need some guidance on how to prioritize them so that we can make the vision take shape. Facilities and staffing, Ms. Lochner touched on. We're going to touch on more in depth about how we can build long-term plans that track with the master plan, that track with anticipated growth in the region, and that set us on a path for success in terms of not having to go through the near constant exercise of, well, how are we going to deliver services there? How are we going to deliver services here? We'll do the work on the front end so that we know the answer to those questions And then, of course, building alliances both in the private sector and with our regional partners in government for the effective and efficient delivery of services. You can see how that ties together with some of the points made more broadly in the strategic plan. This is probably, the master plan is probably a plan that I think most communities struggle with in terms of implementation the most. A lot of effort goes into it, and then unfortunately they by and large do sit. But like I said before, this is where the action happens, and we are fortunate enough to have an extremely solid master plan. This is our opportunity to shape the community, and it's one that we do need to implement. We need to take it off the shelf, and we need to get going. That said, you know, the message you're going to hear today over and over and over again is that we need to have our staff, they need to get the breathing room they deserve and need to build those policies and implement them. And so we need the discipline to see that through. The Downtown Action Plan, you've all read it, you're all familiar with it. It is based in significant market research. It defines real world hurdles to activation and redevelopment that exists downtown. And it's instructive when we evaluate proposals in downtown spaces and in understanding why downtown perhaps isn't popping exactly the way we'd like it to. I said before, I'm going to say again, I'll say several times throughout this presentation that we need to give people a reason to be downtown. We need to connect the university with Midtown. We want folks walking. We want them on the street. We want them to have retail and entertainment opportunities, dining opportunities. We want them to feel comfortable coming downtown so that they can enjoy the river and our parks and you know, be part of the economic drivers of our city. So the first thing that I want to talk about, like I said, we want to start at the bottom of that pyramid, is budget resilience. Ms. Lochner referenced developing a resilient budget, and that might mean different things to different people, but by and large, to me, it means stability and baseline service delivery. The way we get there is, of course, we do eliminate the existing structural deficit because that will help us you know, better understand the opportunities that are in front of us. It will help us be more responsible in managing the public's money in a way that makes sense for the long-term goals of the city. And one of the best ways to do that, I think, is by working towards a zero-based budgeting program. Probably not a perfect solution for all facets of the city budget, but zero-based systems like budgeting for outcomes are generally more responsive to the needs of the community. We justify all the expenses, and we reduce legacy expenses that perhaps aren't as necessary and are only in the budget because that's the way we've always done things. But zero-based budgeting is resource intensive, and it can reward short-term thinking if it's not properly managed. And so I think the important thing when we talk about zero-based budgeting is that it focuses on why we're doing a thing and not how much money we're spending on a thing. Of course, how much is important, but understanding why we're doing it and what we hope to achieve by doing it is more important. The cost benefit analysis and the business case decision-making that come out of a budgeting process like that, I think are easier to explain to the public and they are easier to generate some buy-in with respect to what we're prioritizing and how we're going about getting that work done. And so I just said it's easier to explain to the public, and I think that that's important. The budget doesn't need to be a mystery. It doesn't need to be a mystery to the public. It doesn't need to be a mystery to our employees. It is, in fact, how we define what we are, and perhaps more importantly, what we are not. And so we have to find a better way to tell our story, and we must be better about showing the value that's provided by our extremely talented and dedicated employees, and telling that story in a way that contextualizes service provision in the community. I think we understand overhead. I'm sensitive to Councilmember Reese's comments that running the city is, of course, not the same as running a budget. But there are some crossovers, as he acknowledged. And one of those things is in our overhead. We haven't necessarily done a great job of measuring that And that has led to, as everybody's acknowledged, under-resourced administrative departments that can't necessarily adequately support our operational departments. That's a risk issue when it comes to work comp administration, when it comes to human resources, when it comes to purchasing and benefits administration, and when it comes to hiring. We need to make sure that our internal divisions are supported so that they can support our more public-facing functions. We need to develop a long-term staffing plan. I think everybody sort of acknowledges that. But what this means to me is using standards of service, we can determine both our current and project our future staffing needs. And so by developing that, by adopting that, and then committing to it through the budget process, we will be able to reduce the urgency of some of these more important issues. And it will stabilize the budget process because we'll all be playing from the same sheet of music. We'll understand what the service delivery goal is and what the service delivery standard is and how it needs to be staffed and how we're going to get there. So for example, back to the overhead comment, one of the ways you might do that is say, we know that we need X number of human resources techs to support Y number of firefighters. And when we bring on those firefighters, we could build into the cost of employing them, the cost of employing a human resources person who's dedicated to taking care of that portion of the organization. And that way, we're not constantly triaging the needs of all of the departments and creating a bottleneck that creates operational difficulty. We're also looking for opportunities to share resources, things like records, things like an admin pool, things like centralized purchasing, so that we can have a more robust policy discussion on how we do those things, are something that we're discussing with the management team. And then working towards some consistency in the CBAs for some of the administrative portions of those agreements, and better understanding for everyone involved the impact on both the budget and the manner in which we go about our business, I think is incredibly important. The CIP we touched on, I don't want to spend too much more time on it other than to say, we need to make it a work plan instead of a wish list. And we need to define what's real and how we're going to pay for it and on what timeline. And then we need to manage to that. The regional fiscal equity and provision of services, this is a place where we can talk about forensics, we can talk about sheltering. I think that it's a much broader conversation than most people appreciate, but it's one that I think it's long overdue and something that we need to focus on over the next year or two or three. Similar to staffing, we need to develop and then stick to a plan that will result in better managed facilities and service delivery. Understanding what our obligations are now, what the minimum level of acceptable service is, and then what our obligations are as we expand and grow as a community, and how we're going to pay for those things. Ultimately, we probably start to look at an impact fee for those things where it's appropriate. And so what we want to do is we want to bring you a plan for facilities and services by January of next year that will identify appropriate service levels over the next 20 years for those areas identified in front of you. I think the key here is to develop meaningful measures of delivery and get to a point where we are, in fact, in a spot to deliver just-in-time services. It's something that anyone who has sat through some of the land use hearings recently is aware of, right? We talk about fire in this context a lot. And I think that's, one of the places where we'd obviously start in terms of what do we have, what do we need, where are we going, and how are we going to pay for it? But again, when we get down to that, how are we going to pay for it? Sort of the message of the day is we are going to need that fiscal discipline Ms. Lochner spoke of to make sure that these plans are in fact actionable and sustainable and do not just sit on a shelf. We also can't ignore what we've already got. We have to maintain our facilities. We have to make sure that the things that we have are inviting and used and there for the community that we serve. We can't focus too much on the horizon and let the things deteriorate that we've already built. And so we can explore some opportunities with our regional partners in terms of how we deliver these services. But in terms of our actual maintenance plans for our existing facilities, we'd like to follow up in January of 22, the future plans with a plan to maintain our existing facilities and how we're going to continue to provide high-level services for the community at large. This is important again, right? Both budgetarily and with our behavior in terms of the things we designate as important. We cannot ignore what we have today in favor of what we hope to have tomorrow. The implementation of the master plan is a 20-year pull. It's a 20-year plan, and we need to do a better job of showing up at least once a year to say, this is what we've done, and these are the results we've seen from implementing whichever portions of the plan have been put in place over the last calendar year. We have to be intentional about the way we measure progress in implementation and the way we measure the results we anticipate seeing from that implementation. Essentially, we need to answer the question, did it work? Because this is the guiding document for the vision that the council has laid out for the city at large. Master plan is a solid document. It's a wonderful vision. It has 42 pages of implementation strategies. And so while we've identified the priority initiatives, all of which are identified and addressed in this slide deck, we need to give room to allow the work on implementation to our staff, and we need to give it time to be effective. There's a lot going on here, and staff is excited to get to work on pulling this off the shelf and actually implementing it. And so by June of this year, we'll have a framework by which the various implementation strategies are prioritized through the lens of the initiatives. And by December of this year, we will have actual work programs with timelines, funding, and resources so that we can start to put our finger on the scale. An important component part of that is the changes in Title 18 that are forthcoming, both the parking lot and some of the things that we've identified in our master plan and our strategic planning documents. We need to reconcile the master plan and the zoning designations on our 2-map system. We're going to have an opportunity here to do some cleanup amendments on the Title 18 changes that were just passed. But we have 16 issues that are parked proverbially, and we'll run through those. But at your April 28th meeting, you'll have an agenda item whereby we will be able to ask you to rank the 16. We'll also give you an opportunity to identify some things that maybe weren't parked but have jumped out at you in the first months of living with Title 18 so that staff can get to work. So affordable housing is going to be one of our recommendations for something that ought to be prioritized in this round of updates in this next year's worth of work. I don't need to read the list to you all. I think later today, if there's something that wasn't on here that you were thinking of, let me know so that we can get it built in. But this is what the parking lot looks like by and large for the Title 18 amendments. For our unsheltered population and our housing efforts, it's a multidisciplinary effort. It's a big lift. It's a team effort here in the city of Reno. So we have the Clean and Safe team, which of course is housed in the city manager's office, but is comprised of members from various departments around the city. The Nevada Cares campus has been a thing that's been in the news recently and has been a tremendous investment and step forward for our community. The transition of sheltering responsibility to the county is a thing that we talked about earlier, and we'll talk about more here in a minute. But we're going to talk about it just a little bit differently than we normally do. And I'm going to try to explain what the opportunity cost of us continuing to run point on some of those sheltering obligations looks like, because that is where we will really be able to pick up some momentum and start to focus on housing. So starting with clean and safe, there on the left side of the slide, there's a set of numbers that I really want to draw your attention to. So in 2020, the clean and safe team made almost 4,000 contacts and just under 100 folks accepted services. But in the first 3 months of this year, the clean and safe team, almost half of the people with whom they come in contact have accepted services from them. And I think that's a testament to an incredible team. I think that they really have found their stride, and the manner in which they approach folks and offer services is starting to take hold. Obviously, too, we're doing some cleanup work, 3,500 cubic yards of waste, 480 gallons of biohazard disposed of. And we will continue to make sure that our public facilities and our public spaces are inviting and clean and are something that the public at large wishes to utilize. This is a Gantt chart for the CARES campus. I am here to tell you today that these dates towards the bottom, particularly the one with the red outline, are going to be pushed 2 weeks more. So where we were shooting for an opening on April 30th, what you'll see now is an anticipated opening in the middle of May. The reason for that is the same as the reason for the original push to the end of April, and that is that the bathrooms and the showers that have been purchased for the site have been delayed in their arrival because of the freeze we had earlier this year in Texas. The production facilities were moved to Arizona, and that, of course, took up some time as they moved people and equipment and materials. So it's important that when we open it right, and it is not piecemealed together. And so it is our recommendation that we push that opening date another couple weeks so that we can make sure all of the pieces are in place, so that it is a considerable upgrade from our existing shelter facilities. Significant outreach and coordination with both the Clean and Safe team, the advocacy groups, and the unsheltered population has been going on since about November of last year. The Companion Safe Camp pilot program is looking like it will be ready to go in about June. And we continue to negotiate transition of sheltering operations to the county with the county manager's office and his team. And the reason that transition is so important is that our housing and neighborhood development team, who heads up our sheltering operations, effectively gives up 2 full-time employees to the COC and shelter ops. And we spend about $700,000 a year, about $500,000 in CDBG funds and about $200,000 in ESG funds on that sheltering effort. But mostly, when the county takes over the sheltering effort, we'll be buying time. We'll be buying time to collaborate between hand and planning and revitalization on innovative, affordable housing solutions. We'll be able to leverage better deals by combining funds, and we'll be able to effectuate better outcomes in housing affordability, which is really the mission of that department. Sustainability, we touched on just a few minutes ago. It's a complex ecosystem, and we want a meaningful regulatory framework that delivers measurable improvement. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of good ideas. We want to make sure that we have a framework in place that is in fact delivering measurable results for our community. And we want to be competitive in the space, right? We'd like to be a leader in the country in that regard. And so we think the best way to do that is for us to identify the most effective operational, for us, policies, and the most effective community-wide policies. And we should always be asking ourselves, what's meaningful in this space and what is in fact going to drive noticeable, obvious improvement. Waste diversion, emissions in transportation, resiliency, as we were talking about before, and energy conservation are all places where we think we should be focusing. we can compare ourselves to other top performing mid-sized cities and identify how we can do better. We need to be realistic, and we need to explain the cost benefit to the community. Effectively, we need to tell them why, because otherwise all they hear are the voices that say it's expensive and not necessarily strictly necessary, which I believe we all agree is not necessarily true. So, a standalone sustainability code, we'd like to get to the council for adoption by the end of the first quarter, beginning of the second quarter in 2023. That is a significant collaborative effort. We can't do it alone, and we need to demonstrate and communicate the progress and the benefits to the community so that we have a stakeholder group that will help us make this successful. Some folks will have to be brought along, and some folks will come along willingly. But it's a conversation that I know we've started, and I know we've had, and I know we have a sustainability plan. But putting it into action, like so many other things, is a considerable undertaking. I've said probably 3 or 4 times now, we need to give people a reason to use downtown. We need to build an environment in which folks feel safe and invited into that space so that we can really start to see the realization of the downtown action plan. So one of the ways we're looking to do that is we'd like to reduce the year over year, we'd like to see a 20% reduction in observed violations as measured against the visual preference survey that we do quarterly. And against that, or through that same lens, a 10% improvement in the appearance of public right-of-way and the first floor building facades. Same as an increase in activity levels on the river and other public spaces, another 10% increase through the lens of that survey. And we'd like to see a 10% increase in event attendance. And so we'll focus our efforts and our partnerships in moving towards those goals. And of course, we'll publicize our progress on the same. One of the other ways we can start to effectuate the downtown action plan is we can increase building occupancy. We suggest that these economic development programs that are listed on your screen, we start to work with groups and applicants so that we see a 10% year-over-year increase in program utilization in downtown until that area use reaches about $3 million annually. Similarly, we hope to see a 10% year-over-year increase in occupancy rates until 90% of the available space is used by making sure that our codes and our frameworks haven't inadvertently put up barriers to use in downtown. Another 10% increase, we'd like to see a 10% year-over-year increase in facility utilization rates each month until 80% of the peak season days are used and 60% of the off-season days are used. That's going to necessitate changes in event facility operating agreements and collaborating with the RSCVA to market downtown instead of other parts of the community. We also need to coordinate events with the university and other entities that are hosting events so that we can increase usage in the bowling stadium and the REC. And that really gets us back to the strategic plan. There's a phrase that I am really fond of, and it's that boiling point is just 1 degree more than very warm. And I think that's where we are. I think we're very warm and we're poised to hit a boiling point in the region. But we have to be committed to seeing the strategic plan through to implementation. Using these guideposts, using these goals as our bellwether, both for our decision-making and our work prioritization, we really are set to realize the opportunity that made me so excited to join the team, and I think has all of us excited for the next 3 to 5 years here in Reno. And so to recap, we have an incredibly talented and dedicated team here at the staff level. But it takes what it takes to get this done, right? There's no magic. There are no shortcuts. This is pick and shovel work. And we need to give our staff and our subject matter experts the ability to sit and implement the policies and develop the programs that the council's prioritized through these strategic planning documents. We're all incredibly excited to get started. I know you are too. And so with that, I'd love to open it up for feedback on what's working for you and what's not, and questions on how we're going to spend our time over the next year.
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, that was the best. But we'll open it up. And does any council members have their hands raised? I don't see one. Oh, let's go to Councilwoman Jardin, and then we'll go to Councilwoman Dewar.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your efforts in all of this, Mr. Manager. I think you have distilled some very complex, multifaceted strategic priorities that I think we all worked very, very hard on for many strategic meetings, and boiled it back down to, use what you've got. No need to spend a ton of time recreating the wheel. The question I had on some of the references to, let's say, the downtown action plan, were those included as attachments to, were all of the related action plans included with this strategic plan?
Not all of them,
Okay.
Councilmember Jardin. Many of the metrics that I just showed you, many of the work plans that I just showed you, and the path forward over the next year has been developed over the last 6 months by your management team. They've worked incredibly hard at taking the strategic plan, taking the master plan, taking the downtown action plan, and saying, all right, how do we turn this into an actionable program that we can implement with the resources we have? And so what's come out of that is a set of deliverables, essentially, to get us to a place where we can offer guidance to you and offer programs to you for adoption that will help guide budgetary decisions and service delivery decisions for the future.
So maybe I wasn't clear. I think what would be helpful is if we could get just an email with the links to all the related plans that are referenced within your proposed strategic plan.
Yes.
To refresh
Absolutely.
our memories. I know some of them are very voluminous, so I'm not necessarily suggesting that they all be attachments and printouts and that sort of thing, but just to kind of distill down the subset information that already exists for us to better take action on. That was my only thing. That was my only question. If there was a clearinghouse that we could go to with those links that are referenced within this. That's all.
Happily.
Thank you.
And I believe next is Councilwoman Dewar.
Yeah.
And then we'll go to Councilman Reese.
Good. I too loved the presentation, Doug. I thought it was really thorough and high level. And what's important is that I think that you hit on a lot of the segments of the strategic plan that we adopted a year ago, and identified that we're already moving forward on some of those things. I wanted to continue the conversation on sustainability just for a minute. I know that you put 2023, so I think that's a long ways away, especially since our staff worked really hard as part of Title 18 and had basically developed something. Everyone didn't agree on it, but it does exist. And I think it built, I mean, I did not participate in it, so I don't know what all the words say, but I know that a lot of members of our community did, and they felt like very committed to it, and they wanted to get started. And it seemed like the challenges there when we were about to adopt it, some people thought it didn't go far enough, but a lot of the environmental community was saying, we love it, let's move forward with it. So they weren't the ones saying it didn't go far enough. They were saying, let's do it. What my suggestion would be on that is that rather than trying to do a whole global reset, is that we try to take this piece by piece so we can do the parts of it sooner rather than later. So we took a stab already when we redid the waste management contract. It was just a stab, but we set some goals and we said we're going to revisit these issues. One example would be the hazardous waste recycling. So we said we're going to do a quarterly through a private company. And that wasn't originally how it was envisioned, but that is how, it ended up going. And people that I've posted about that we're going to do the first quarter here really soon are super excited. They're getting ready to clean out the garage. The piece that I don't know that they know is that we said they could maybe visit only once a year. And my proposal when we did the waste management was they could visit every quarter. People are always cleaning their garages, not just once a year. So that's just a small example. Another example is the trees. For 6 or 7 years, we've been working on a tree ordinance. We're still not there, but it's like the number one simplest thing that cities can do to reduce ozone, to reduce the impacts of climate change. It doesn't take a, rocket scientist, so to speak, to figure it out. Many cities are doing it. We're there too. So what I would like to see us do is maybe adopt a page out of what we did with the Truckee River Flood Project. So we knew that we couldn't fix it all at one time, but we also knew that each of the cities at that time, Reno, Sparks, Washoe County, and the Reno Sparks Indian Colony had sort of a top project that they wanted to work on that they knew that was important to get done. The city of Reno's was the Virginia Street Bridge. And so we didn't wait till we got the whole darn plan done 10 more years. What we did was we said, let's get started on some low-hanging fruit and let's give a project to each community to work on. And so as a result, 10 years later, we have a Virginia Street Bridge. We're not just talking about it. We have a replacement. We figured it out. We funded it. We got it done. So my suggestion is to take the low-hanging fruit from the sustainability plan, whether it's trees or even what I mentioned before about the building code. The reason the building code is important is you identified moving to addressing the air pollution from transportation. Well, if we give people a way to charge their electric cars at their house that they don't have to do a $5,000 retrofit, then that, we're there. And so that may not be a low hanging fruit because there's a cost associated there, and I get it. But for our overall sustainability goals, just doing those two things, for example, doing the tree ordinance and rewiring houses will probably bring down, tackle 80% of our air pollution issues. So my suggestion is just to think about every plan that you mentioned and Councilwoman Jordan just asked for a link to, the downtown action plan, the master plan, every single one of them talks about trees. Every single one of them. We don't have to rethink this. Most of them talk about alternate energy. I call it still the old term, alternate energy, sustainable energy. So that would be my suggestion, is that you work with our sustainability manager and the new person I hope you'll hire, and you figure out what the low hanging fruit is, and that we start get going on some of that while we're trying to deal with the bigger picture. I mean, look at it. Sparks got North Truckee Drain done. Reno Sparks Indian Colony got an entire levee done, built a Walmart, put 350 people to work. We're elevating homes. We didn't have to wait for the whole big thing to be done. So that's just a thought. So I'll leave it there on this moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Doer. Councilman Reese.
Thank you, Madam Vice Mayor. Mr. Thornley, thank you for the well-organized and thoughtful presentation. I guess I have a couple of comments, and they're not very specific to any individual action item. I'm not sure what depth you want to get into today, but I want to just be able to clarify some thoughts to my colleagues and to the public. First, I think that the pandemic has laid bare a lot of issues both here and nationally. But I also believe there's a great deal of hope building and momentum building towards seeing at least the end of the pandemic in sight is my hope, with vaccination rates increasing. Historically, I think it's analogous, and I've mentioned this before, and I've done a fair amount of research on it, to the 1918 flu, the Spanish flu, and then the roaring 20s that came out of that. And my point in all of this is that I am very optimistic that Reno is poised for an incredible rebound. We have done things that will allow our community to grow, and I think it is going to grow very quickly. And so the task will be not only to plan for the immediate things that we have going on, but also to think about where we want this community to be in 25 and 30 years. And so, let us cast a big vision and be optimistic about our future. I think many of the plans that we have created will now come to and have the ability to be put into place because of that optimism. Part of that too is tempered, or it is not really tempered, but informed by the fact that I believe there are going to be some funds from the federal government through the American Recovery Plan that will allow us to perhaps move some of the things that we've prioritized for a long time forward in a way that we might not otherwise have been able to do it. So I'm looking forward to that. My second point is really simply that, I want to empower you as our manager and the staff at the city of Reno to go forward and act and do the good work. I know that in the last year and a half, we've been having to be very reactive. But I think our staff is to be commended for navigating us through the pandemic, and also how I believe that they should be empowered as we move forward. We will set policy guidance and we can set the priorities for our community as we've been elected to do so. But the staff is going to be a crucial component. And my role will be to support you in those efforts and making sure that the staff knows that I have their back, and that the efforts that we undertake will be the ones that we as a body decide to do. I think that's an important thing for our community to understand, is the role that we have and the role that I think our staff has. And then the last thing I will just say is, sometimes it's a leap of faith. And, Madam Mayor is often fond of saying, we only fail when we aren't trying. So we're going to go out there and we're going to start doing the work that is necessary to move our community forward for everyone. And there are going to be things that we might fail at. But I don't think if we're not dreaming big enough, and if we're not willing to fail, I think then that's where we get in the habit of doing something that will not benefit us. So let us dream big, let us be bold, let us seek to increase opportunity for our most vulnerable communities and communities who haven't had a voice. And I think if we do that and keep our eyes on the prize, we'll have a great deal of success with some of the things. And those are my opening comments. I might have more specific ones on individual items, but I'm not sure where that fits in today. Thank you for the time.
Great, thank you so much. Councilwoman Breckus?
Yeah, thank you. I agree with Mr. Reese that we've been very reactive in the last year. And to that end, I think it's been a lost year in many ways, but an opportunity to be faithful to the goal setting work we did back when, which I see on that, circular slide, but it's pretty broad. So I think with the new manager, what I just saw was a presentation to try and interpret that from him, who wasn't here then, and then also meld that with some of the organizational issues that he, they're linked, but he's got to rebuild an organization or mold an organization to effectuate, those goals. This is the first time I've seen this presentation. There was a lot in there. There's a lot I'd like to continue to mull over. For example, the Title 18 work, and that's an area I know pretty strongly. I'm not ready to say, yes, we said yes to that today. I think it still needs some digesting and sub items. And I think we'll look forward to that. For me, when I get a strategic plan and has these priority areas, I have desired outcomes that follow. Then I have strategies to get there. And then I have metrics to measure how you get there, and then milestones and resources. So I think for each of those, that's how I'd like to see it. He's called out things from the Downtown Action Plan that, it's a big document. These are the ones, and that's great. I'd like to respond to maybe some of those and say, well, I really thought we were going to move into making downtown a little more walkable, and RTC was on the path of doing a cycle track, and that seems to have fallen off. I haven't heard much about that, so I'd like to interject that into that myself. And then, also with the public facilities work, which is going to be very complex, because you're working with growth projections and land use analysis. We also had intermediate issues like that's going on, like the sewer. And I'm not hearing a whole lot of the things that are right in front of us. And that in particular, I'm hearing, oh, we need to pay off some bonds for the sewer. But it's not explained that we're paying off those bonds because we think we're going to have to go out on enormous bonds and we want some cleared out debt. And so I think that if you have a framework that the public facilities, first of all, is moving forward with the massive expansion of that plant, here's the steps to that. And when you have a conversation, it just doesn't come out of the blue, unconnected, disconnected to a strategy. And there's always spots on the staff reports for those to get plugged in. So, but in general, I think it's a faithful interpretation of our goals with some organizational work that we would be expecting. The one value that I'm not hearing that has really taken shape in my mind in the last year, and I think there is basis for it in our downtown action plan and in our master plan, is one of equity. And certainly the pandemic showed that equity is a big issue, and so is housing, because we've seen so much displacement and upward pressure of some of the housing stock, and also within our organization. An organization being built to provide the services based upon equitable allocation of resources, equity, and trying to be very transparent, merit-based hiring, how that blends into our values as he put in there. So, but other than that, I think it was good. I just would like to see it more fleshed out with strategic goal, the outcome, desired outcomes, the strategies, the resources, implementation, and timeframes, because that's how you know when you're on track. And then the allegiance to, when something comes up out of the blue, like maybe it's important, it's very responsive. There's some natural disaster, or something, or whatever. We have a concrete conversation on how and if and why we're pivoting on that. For example, the public safety center that we bought, the RGJ building, that was never a conversation until all of a sudden it was on the agenda to buy that building. And that, to me, is very unstrategic, and was unstrategic at that time. Unstrategic or non-strategic at that time. And I think that we can't do a lot of that pivoting without going back to this touchstone. So thank you, Ms. Weber, for letting me speak on that matter.
Thank you so much. Okay, then we'll go to Councilwoman Jordan.
Thank you very much. I know I've already gone around once, so I didn't know if anybody that hasn't spoken wanted to jump in or not. I guess I have a question for Mr. Manager, and I think it is something that we have struggled with in the past, is to stay laser focused on what our strategic priorities are and how the actions and the behaviors in which we present tie back to those strategic priorities. So I'm going to ask you, what is your strategic priority coming out of today's meeting and what you need from us? Because we have 1 hour left. And I'm trying to better understand if you're wanting us to say, what we've identified in the past as a strategic priority no longer is, or is diminished in its scope, whatever it may be, or are you just wanting, I want to be clear on what you are wanting from us today, because it will waterfall into all the next steps. I just want to be clear on what direction you're wanting from us today.
Well, I think what I'm looking for, Councilmember Jordan, is this. I said at the beginning that these are all relatively new plans. And so I don't believe that there is utility in rewriting them today, or even necessarily reprioritizing them today. Although taking Councilmember Breckis's comment on equity into account, that is certainly a thing that needs to be built into these plans sort of on the fly, or at least we need to be more intentional about the lens through which we approach some of these challenges. What I am looking for today is sort of specifically, if there is a thing in these plans, or there is a manner in which I just laid out that we intend to approach them that does not work for this council, I want to hear about it today, because otherwise this is the foundational work that staff is going to focus on for the next couple of years.
Okay, that's what I needed to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a question. And then we'll go to Councilwoman Breckus. Thank you for raising your hand. So my question is back to the manager. I did not hear us or anything about the forensic part of what I had mentioned before. And so I don't know if you can include that someplace or if I missed it. But I really do believe that that conversation needs to happen, and it probably needs to, how we went from having the discussion. We had lots of questions. We were told that this would be the opportunity to ask more questions or whatever, but it sounds like it's moving forward. And you've said that working with Washoe County. And so I would like to either at some point in time, figure out where that plays a role here.
Well, where that plays a role is in a much broader conversation on equity, fiscal equity and delivery of services region-wide, and what the respective roles of all of the regional agencies, entities, and partners are. As it relates to forensics in particular, going back more than 20 years, the city of Reno, as you know, has an agreement or had an agreement in place with Washoe County whereby the city took care of dispatch and the county took care of forensics. And as forensics evolved as a science and as a tool that we use in the criminal justice system, certainly the cost of forensics outpaced the cost of dispatch. But both of them are critical in terms of our ability to deliver services. And so what we found is that Washoe County has requested that we pay a bill of almost $2 million to continue to receive forensics services from the sheriff's office. What we've found is that the total cost for RPD to outsource the lab work and establish investigative services through the employees that you saw in Ms. Lochner's slide deck is about half of that. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't a reason to stay with Washoe County, but it's a broader conversation, particularly when you divorce it from the relatively myopic perspective of just dispatch and forensics, right? When we start to talk about regional teams, when we start to look at the fact that folks who pay property taxes in Washoe County, if you pay property taxes inside the city of Reno and then the city of Reno pays a $2 million forensics bill, you are effectively paying $1.60 for the same service that someone who lives in the county pays only $1 for. And so there are an awful lot of moving parts as it relates to law enforcement in our region because, crime sort of does not respect the geopolitical boundaries of the two cities in the county. But it is not the county subsidizing our law enforcement. In fact, it's quite the opposite.
Okay, thank you. I don't agree with the comments that have been made, so I guess I can talk to you later about it. But I hope that from my understanding, I thought it was because the city of Reno did not pay the forensics for many years.
The agreement that we had in place was that it was a straight trade between dispatch and forensics. And we have absolutely provided our obligation, or we have met our obligation with respect to dispatch.
Okay, thank you. Okay, then we'll go to the next was Councilwoman Breckus, and then we'll go to Councilwoman Dewar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Okay, I do think that the issue of dispatch is a good one. And I think a previous iteration of our regional plan really talked about regional issues, regional efficiencies, services. And, this dispatch could be cleaned up under public safety or fiscal sustainability. I think it goes up to fiscal sustainability because the fiscal issue really is, what is the role of the county? What is the role of the city in those services? And this big, broad intergovernmental relations issue that I think has not been well worked out in many ways, particularly with growth relationship to growth. And sometimes it's, oh, let's have a joint meeting. Let's sit up an advisory board or regional board. I think Reno needs to come at it from their perspective. And I think there's a lot of work for us to get to that point strategic, even though we don't have it as one of our priority goals. I would say that, and I think the manager has a good handle on it. I think that the one thing that seems very weak from what I saw from, and that's why I would like to see this more fleshed out. I think that the slide decks work well in this kind of format, particularly on Zoom, but a strategic plan doesn't need a whole lot of narrative, but it needs a little more fleshing out than that, just a slide deck. I really do believe that. And I think the previous one we adopted in February was an actual plan document. But I think you're weak on economic development because you're showing, all these programs, but you're not really showing, and the master plan said, go do your economic development plan. And then it never clarified what the role of, going and recruiting businesses are, which EDON does. It never got into, because our plan said community development, which is very different from economic development, gets into the equity piece. So I think you're a little weak on that because you're just listing some programs, but you're not really listing, I think, the strategy that we needed to go and how we deploy resources there. And so that's kind of what it is. And I would like a sound plan and the allegiance to it. I'll just bring it up again. I know the shelter is something that people are very excited about and work very, very much forward on it, but it was nowhere in the plan. In December of 2019, Miss Newby wrote a letter about the governor's bowl, hey, NDOT, do you have the governor's bowl? It never went to the council. The shelter was a thing in motion with contracts let out until November of 20. It never came forward as a council's, how it embedded into this goal. It was never here for table discussion with this council, with this body. It was moving forward, more or less implementing this goal without the discussion of this council. And I would have preferred to have gone in a different direction, even with the CARES Act money, but we were never given the allegiance to implement this plan under the outcomes, strategies, resources component. And I just, having read the CAFR in the last month, seeing what a magnitude of an issue it was, the CARE shelter, felt like it just all happened over here without us being of one head to have it done through our decision and our actions. So I just use that again as another example and why I really do want to see a document that is a little more concrete so that if something comes in from over here, we can rebalance this plan to say yes or no if we want to go there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Breckus. Madam Mayor, did you want to go next?
Yeah, I'll just try to make this brief. First of all, Doug, I thought you did a really, really good job. I think, we've seen a lot of strategic plans over the years. I mean, all of us, right? And I thought yours was really well done. I thought the slide deck was really good. Everything was very clear. The one thing I would just say, and this isn't negative feedback at all, this is, Reno is now a very complex city and we are a medium-sized city. We are no longer a small city. And it's so funny. I was trying to reflect on when Oscar and I first got into office. And I remember one of, the big issues was parking meters. Remember that, Oscar? And so, I think we have to also remember we've had a ton of wins because there are times that we get into the weeds, we get very focused on what's wrong instead of what's right. And there's a lot that we have done that's right. Reno is a booming city. People want to be here. People from California constantly are wanting to be here. And there's a reason for that. And I would say, even if I disagree with you, because we all have very different personalities and priorities, but I would say this, I think we should all appreciate some of those differences and different opinions, because it actually, at the end of the day, does build projects better, even if they aren't supported. Right? I think Jenny will make a lot of really strong arguments, whether I agree with her or not. I think they make projects better. And so I want everyone to kind of focus on the things we have done right. And much of that is a testament to this council and to county commission and the city of Sparks, because I think everyone is doing a lot right. So I would just say, we just really also need to focus on some of the things, and especially those priorities. I think those priorities are fantastic, but they have changed so drastically from when we started this journey. I mean, I'll never forget our first vote. I think Naoma was baseball, right? And it was very controversial. And, you know, I can't imagine our city without the baseball stadium. And as much as you might not like giving subsidies now more than ever, private and public partnerships, and I don't even want to call them subsidies, I think we need to look at development and economic development with partners from private and public partnerships. I think they're more essential now than ever. And anytime if you're in an economic forum about cities, especially if you're, I don't know what you guys follow, but the mayors have a whole bunch of economic development strategies. And we did call in one. What was that one that they did that big, what was that one we did, Naoma? They came here and did a full-blown study. Land, what was it?
Oh, great.
You mean Puma?
Thank you, Puma.
Yeah, right. Anyway, so I'm just saying, even if we don't agree, we've done a lot of really good things together. So I want everyone to kind of focus on some of the positive, because we tend to focus on the negative. And I think we've done a lot right. So Doug, I want to say thank you. I really, really appreciate you. And I do think you did a really good job with the presentation. So I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madam Mayor. Councilwoman Dewar, and then we'll go to Councilwoman Jordan.
Thank you. Excuse me. You know, I think the mayor makes a good point, and I think often the way to address that point is to make sure that as you kind of put this plan in a more concrete form, that we do start with our accomplishments and, you know, over whatever X period of time. I know that when people are working on strategic plans, the whole focus is the future, right? Not the past or even necessarily the present. So, you know, it's always about the focus areas or the high priority things you plan to focus your efforts on and working towards your vision, right? It's why these things always start with vision statements. And then for each value, state the focus area that accompanies that value, and they should be specific. And so I think you're right on track in terms of, you know, how you're approaching this. We've spent a lot of time on vision. We know where we generally want to go. We want to have the best city, the biggest little city, the biggest mid-sized city, wherever I think we all understand it. In fact, for this meeting, I was thinking about bringing a sketch, although I wasn't at the council chambers, that Neom and I did, which was, where do we want to be in 10 years? When we did our first strategic planning. And we wanted to say that when after 10 years, people would say, we got it right. If you guys remember that we got it right. Where do we want to be in 10 years? We want people to say they got it right. And so I think that in the strategic plan, that should be part of the focus here is what is it we're trying to get right? And are we going to feel proud, as the mayor just said? And or are we going to feel frustrated that all we did was deal with today's emergency, right? And today's drama. So I just wanted to introduce a couple items. One of the things that I've heard over the last year and very much amplified by the pandemic has been transparency. And I've looked through your whole slide deck and I don't find that word. And I thought I should introduce it because wherever I go in our city, I keep hearing we don't know what's going on. And you do have something under the communications piece, but it's more about service provision. And it's not so much about accomplishments and it's not so much about upcoming initiatives. Or I have people during this meeting texting me about this development agreement that we're going to talk about tomorrow. They don't understand it. They're nervous about what it is. What does it give away? They're wondering, does it give away a street? And I'm trying to reassure them. I don't think it gives away a street, but let's find out. In other words, they feel out of the loop. So no matter what we adopt, I think that transparency should be an overlay, just as Councilman Breckes talked about equity. I think trying to be as clear about what we're doing and as open to people, and that means, of course, reopening. That means, of course, allowing public comment in a verbal way. That may mean coming back together once we're off Zoom, resuming. So I just think that's an important principle that we got to thread back through. That's the pandemic has kind of shined a light on. And that's where I think people are getting frustrated. So we could do the greatest stuff, but if they don't know about it, or we could be trying to address homelessness, but if they don't understand and they don't feel part of it, so therefore they're critical. And if you understand, I didn't plan to say all this, but I just was thinking I'm bouncing off what other people are saying. And so that I wanted to make that comment. Now I'm willing to like cede the floor at this point, and I want to come back because I do have just a few specifics that I'd like to talk about, but I just wanted to add this theory or concept of accomplishments and transparency into this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And we'll go around. I'm sure that we want to give everybody a chance. So thank you so much. Councilwoman Jordan.
I'm going to defer to Councilman Delgado. I think he's had his hand up for a bit.
Okay, I'm sorry, and I did not see that, and I'm not getting names, so I just see people's hands raised. So thank you so much, and Councilman Delgado.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I appreciate that, Councilman Jordan. And I think you did a great job, Manager Thornley. I appreciate the just kind of really just trying to pull things down for us to kind of better achieve some of these goals that we've all just wanting and feel like as though we understand. And my piece to this is in different ways is through all the many strategic plans that I've worked on is I think we've done this. I think we all, as council members and the mayor, we all feel, we're all attuned to our communities. We hear from our communities. We're very accessible to our communities. But even that being said, there's always opportunities to better hear from our communities. I know in some of the organizations that I've worked for, there's opportunities to do community needs assessments to which better kind of dive into actually really hearing from what the community needs are versus sometimes we hear through social media channels or people that are the loudest in the communities, and that kind of really sways really what, or maybe sometimes can misguide some of the dire needs in our communities. And so really a bigger kind of picture, and I don't know if you guys do that, but just looking at the broad strokes that we have as part of the strategic plan, I think we can kind of conceivably see that. Because one of the pieces that I like to look at, and what I heard you say is this is going to be our plan for the next several years, is the changing demographics of our city. Really, how do we play to make sure that we listen to that, from the growing senior community to the growing disparities in terms of AMIs to just the ethnicity changes, and how do those kind of play into our overall strategic plan so we hear the issues as they change and move forward. So those are just little pockets that I hope that you can take back into in terms of the flexibilities of a constant changing plan, strategic plan anyways, but just my 2 cents, but great job. I know it's a lot of work. It's more than complex to say the least. And so I just appreciate you diving in this and giving us at least a roadmap to move forward. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Great comments. Thank you. Councilwoman Jordan.
Thank you very much. And Councilman Delgado is spot on with some of his questions about how oftentimes some of the things that catch the most fire on social media platforms, which we always try to be very responsive to, can oftentimes have a vein of incomplete or inaccurate information. And I always feel like we're kind of chasing the tail once that occurs, and once that proverbial horse has left the barn, it's very difficult to get that horse back in, but we tend to spend a tremendous amount of time trying to do that. How do we better on the front end? To Councilwoman Dewar's point, as an example, tomorrow's development agreement discussion, I don't think we've done a good enough job on the front end communicating what the concept of a development agreement is, and that this is coming to us for the first time. This will be the first meeting where we listen to what the proposals, not things that we proposed and presented, are coming to us for a very robust discussion. But the community doesn't know that. They tend to think things that hit an agenda have been fully baked and they're just going to, and that's not the case in this regard. And I think your ombudsman discussion hiring is a good one, but I also think something that we don't like to, haven't historically done, is we haven't put money behind efforts to reach our community members. In other words, we do email blasts if you sign up, or we do social media posts, which on our pages. Oftentimes our stuff has lots of information, but it's not particularly always in a super dynamic way that is easily digestible. I think we're going to have to wrap our heads around to get our messages out more strategically and effectively to all of our audience. How do we better do that? Is it in video form? Are we buying some TV time, to clarify so that we don't end up spinning our wheels on the back end on a lot of this stuff, which I do think we have spent a lot of time doing. My final comments are to historically speaking about the region's efforts. When we first came on as Mayor Shivi and Councilman Delgado, and Member Weber will recall, the biggest issues of the day were the parking meters, which were big, boxy, clunky, dysfunctional things that we spent a lot of time fixing. But it was the firefight, if you'll recall, that consumed every news piece for months. Because we worked as a region and because we had very respectful, open discussions with our regional partners, we've not had those problems anymore. And I think those sort of committees, discussions at all levels have been very fruitful. So I fully support working as a region. Again, when you call 911, nobody cares which truck shows up. They just want the truck to show up. So this sort of regional line drawing, I don't think is particularly beneficial. And I think we've come a long way in working with our regional partners. And I fully support continuing doing that.
That's great. Thank you. Good comment. I'm going back to Councilman Delgado. Did you wish to speak again? I still have your hand raised, so I don't know how to make that go away. I'd like to make a quick comment. I really like.
Vice Mayor.
Pardon?
Oh, I was just saying, Vice Mayor, after you comment, I'd just like to add on to Councilwoman Jardin's comments.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to go ahead just real quickly. I just wanted to share the comments of the social media and reaching out to our communities. And I'm finding, because I'm not into the social media part as much as all of you, and it's difficult for me to do that. But what I'm finding is in my ward, especially, is that we are planning to do some mailing, some newsletter type programs. And so I'm really excited about that because I think that will touch everyone at their doorsteps. And I know that there's many people that use social media, but there's also people that don't. And so this will hit every doorstep, and it'll be about the city and about things going on citywide and our services and programs that we have. And then I think I want to also put like a survey in that, and it'd be something that they would mail back. So I'm really excited about that program and using the ability to get out to a lot of people. And I think we all could look at that, as well. So I just wanted to share that. And again, thinking that we're trying to reach everyone. And I think that we have many different ways of doing it. So appreciate that. Okay, Madam Mayor, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just really quickly, I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about, I think Councilwoman Jardin made some very, very good points. One of the things, community engagement, we all know has been a top priority for us, but what hasn't happened in community engagement, to be honest with you, it really has been never made a priority, especially with funding. When I look at other cities, our community engagement department, honestly, is very underfunded. And also with, the level of staffing. And now more than ever, communication has changed so drastically because of social media and the way that people consume their news. But I do want to say, I would like to see, we're always like nickel and diming community engagement when it comes to the budget. And if you guys truly want to see some ramp up on community engagement and interacting within our community, you've got to put the investment behind it. And that's going to be really important. I have to say, every budget, I don't feel like it's ever been a priority. I remember even when Deanna was with us, that was a big struggle and a big fight for her. And I haven't talked to Rebecca about this per se, because Rebecca's, always very, very positive. And she's just, she's sort of like a chameleon, but I would venture to say it should be something that's looked at much more broadly, because now more than ever, as we change and evolve, so does the social media piece and the way that people consume their news. It used to be before we could do a press release and the television would pick it up. That's not even a thing. Most people, use their DVR or, skip the news. Quite honestly, the only thing I watch these days is CNBC and some political channels. And other than that, I don't watch much TV at all. So I think it's got to be a much bigger conversation when it comes to community engagement and how we do reach the community. Because I think you're right in the sense that people will say, I don't know what's going on. And I feel like, there's a lot of different avenues to tell that story, but it's very hard to reach too, because a lot of that you have to use paid media. And there's a lot of different paid media sources nowadays, right? So I just want everyone to keep that in mind. If you really want it as a priority, we've got to focus much more strategically and budget wise for the community engagement aspect of it. Thanks. That's it, Vice Mayor. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Great comments. Let's go back to Councilwoman Dewar.
Okay. Well, I feel kind of proud right now that I kicked this whole thing off with the transparency comment, because this is what I've been getting at for this whole year, is especially in lockdown, that people just feel disconnected. They don't know what's going on. And I think we have to be on all channels, right? To the points that have been made here. I was told earlier in the year, you do it. You have a town hall. You put it out on your Facebook. It's completely inadequate. So I have a couple thousand people that follow me. That's not tens of thousands of people. That's a couple thousand. And, or put it on Twitter. So 6 people see it. It's just not, it's completely insufficient. So I'm glad we're having this conversation, because it's something, I feel like that's why I ran, was to engage the public in their government. And I think we're hitting on a big thing here, Doug. I think you're hearing it from numerous of us that feel the same way, maybe expressing it in different ways. So I'm going to dive in a little bit, since we've been talking big picture. You have potential amendments to Title 18, and you have a long list of stuff in our parking lot. And I venture to say there's probably more than what you've listed here, because I actually remember some things that we still haven't gotten to that aren't on the list. But one of the things I want to make sure that I understand is this issue about wildlife, because we have something called urban wildland interface and fire safety. And to me, that speaks about urban interface with wildlife as well. We have something called habitat management plans, but I'm not sure if it's managing the habitat, managing the wildlife and things that live in the habitat. I just want to make sure I know what the words mean and that it's covered. Whether it's animals, plants, insects, fish, whatever it is, I feel that we are a little short. The Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Governing Board has embarked on a natural resource plan. And it's like we pushed, there's 10 of us, right, from the region. We pushed to say this is something that has not been done and needs to be done. And I bring it up because we've all been talking about horses a lot, and it's at least in 2 of our wards, and yet horses don't appear on this list. And I don't know if they're subsumed under habitat management. Virginia range words don't appear. I don't know. I don't even see area plans. We all have them. So whether it's in Ward 4 and in where Peavine comes in, or the North Valleys, or whether it's in Mogul and Bird Eye, or whether it's for me in the Virginia range, this urban wildland interface is complex. And I've said for a long time, most of my wards, 3/4 of it is surrounded by county and or wildlands. And yet we don't seem to be very good at those interface issues. So I think it's broader than fire is what I guess I'm trying to say. And I think it affects almost every ward, other than those that are super urban, that touch downtown. but even Ward 5 that touches downtown has a big area of open space that's associated with it. And I really feel that unless we get ahead of this issue, we're going to end up in a city that's just sort of growing scattershot, and it's any city, USA. And this is the one thing I hear is, I don't know what the right words are, whether it's form and function of development. Somebody even today called me before this meeting and they said, Naomi, what would be really sad is after the recession, we had an opportunity to reset and do something amazing. In other words, make some big goals and make Reno different. You've made a point of what can Reno do different than other cities? How can we be bolder or better? Well, what I'm worried about right now is we're just responding to demand, but we're not guiding the demand into, we're trying with the tiers that we adopt in regional planning. We're trying, but the demand is what the conversation's all about. It's never the how are we getting there or how do we protect what we have, the special things that we have. Maybe it's the antelope in North Valleys or pronghorn mule deer, pronghorn antelope or mule deer or horses. So that kind of define that area. And we can just push them all out, which is kind of what we've been doing, or we can figure out ways to work with them. And so you have a number of things here, and I'm just not clear on the language. And I want to make sure that this issue of other life besides ourselves is addressed, and is addressed pretty soon, because pretty soon we're just going to be a sea of suburbia, and we won't have utilized the opportunity to capture either recreation or nature. So I've touched horses in Virginia Range. I want to make sure those words appear somehow, some way in our strategic plan. And then I can come back. I know I've probably just talked 3 minutes on just this issue of, quality of life, I guess it might fall under, but that's such a broad term. I'm really getting at these interface issues and how do we manage them best? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see other hands raised. Is there I just saw, there you are. Council Member Reese.
Thank you, Councilmember or Vice Mayor Weber. I want to just say 2 points, and then in no particular order. I think Councilmember Breckus mentioned that this was a lost year, and I just don't want to go without saying that I don't think that that's fully accurate, and I don't mean any slight to my good colleague from Ward 1, just simply that the year was what it was. We had no real way or experience to know how to navigate it. And I'm very proud of how we did navigate it. And quite frankly, we've still done some incredible things in that year. It's not as though we didn't, we shut down in some way. A lot of very positive things can be looked upon, and some growth in our city will be positively viewed as having come out of this year, especially as it relates to our unsheltered population, some changes that we've made in our sewer capacity in the North Valleys. Just there's a lot going on there. Second is, I agree with many of the comments that my colleague, Councilmember Dewar, raised about engaging the public. We all want more engagement in the public. I will say, though, that it is, I don't think it's entirely accurate to say that people are less engaged or know less today than they have in the past. In fact, I think a new group of people have been able to come into our world and be present because of Zoom. And perhaps today is not a real good example, but I'm hoping that as we move forward that we find some way to kind of mush them together. And I know Councilmember Dewar and I have talked about that before, in part because what I observe is when our meetings start at 10 o'clock and they run sometimes till 10 o'clock, the public is not in a position to either come and leave work. Maybe they're dealing with childcare obligations. They're not really able to come from their home in, the South Meadows to council chambers, sit for 6 hours while they wait for their item to come up. The Zoom format has been, I think, quite interesting because it has allowed people to engage in a way that they weren't previously able to do so. So I'll be interested to see how we kind of navigate and sort of merge those two concepts, because I think we of course, all of us, I do believe, want to emerge from a pandemic stronger, more resilient, and better than we were. And some of that is just our own self-reflexivity, right? We've had the opportunity to sit in our homes with our thoughts sort of uninterrupted for greater stretches of time. And I think with all of those things being equal, our point in today's gathering and the point of the presentation has been, what are our strategic focus going to be? And I think that we've all had some time to sit with and wrestle with the important concepts there. And so again, I go back to a belief that we should, of course, celebrate the victories we've had. We should accept the limitations of what COVID meant as a community and hope for a very bright future. And I think we can do that and do that together. So I thank you again, Mr. Manager, for the presentation, because I do think it helps to focus our efforts. And now we'll take some of these pieces of different plans and we'll move forward on them. And again, not speaking specifically to an item, but more the general sense that I think that you've got it right. You've done it. You've organized this thought process well for us. And now we'll have the opportunity to connect the budget from this morning to some of this planning as we move forward, and always in good conscience and together to do that.
Thank you so much. Good comments. Anyone else? Let's go back to Councilwoman Dewar.
Yeah. First of all, I'm so glad that Councilmember Reese brought up about the Zoom, and I don't want to leave a misinterpretation. I think Zoom has expanded our reach. I think, for example, we did have a town hall that was required by the master plan process for rezoning, zoning, master plan change, and 99 people attended that on Zoom. I mean, to me, that's amazing and terrific. And those opportunities, but here's the difference. They were allowed to talk. It wasn't a one-way communication where a developer just said a thing and then it ended. There was interaction. And so they were able to ask their questions in real time and get real-time answers. And so I thought that was a beautiful thing. And I 100% agree. We need to continue using Zoom or whatever interactive media like this as much as we possibly can. I just wanted to mention one other issue. I sense we're getting a little tired. In the, I'm not sure which priority, Title 18. So I'm challenged. The very first bullet that you have, Doug, listed under Title 18 is neighborhood scale reconciliation of master plan and zoning designations. So before we adopted Title 18, I had about 3-4 meetings with the planning staff. And I told them I'm very concerned because you're showing rezoning of areas, intensification, where people don't want to intensify. I mean, they called me, the lobbyists call me, consultants call me, they called me. And yet I was assured that before that happened, we would have these neighborhood scale reconciliation plans so that people that got rezoned, a lot of people don't pay attention to this yellow postcard, or if they even got one in an era where postal service was a little challenging, as you might recall, probably around the time we were sending these out during the election time. Mail was very slow, things were slow. And already in my ward, a upzoning has occurred, and apparently we're giving free upzonings, free to bring into conformance with the new master plan. And we're encouraging people to do these things. But even people that aren't even like thinking about moving today or anything are rezoning their single family homes to something else. And one of those was heard at the Planning Commission. And the people that live around there are very upset. They don't want the next door property rezoned to multifamily. It's a single family neighborhood. Or it's a, maybe a denser single family neighborhood. It's not like on an acre, it's on smaller things. So I am very concerned. And so I reached out to staff and said, okay, you told me this was going to happen, but now we already have rezonings happening. When are you coming to the areas I identified for you 6 months to 8 months before we adopted? And they said, oh, we're not even coming to your neighborhood for the next year. Well, I can't live like this. I mean, in terms of trying to represent my people that are counting on me for representation, they're kind of worked up. And so I just would like a rethinking of how we do this job. I'm only bringing it up because you have it right here on our pages. Very first thing under Title 18, Neighborhood Scale Reconciliation and Master Plan. I know when we first did the master plan, the staff, Sienna specifically, came to us meeting after meeting. Oh, we accidentally rezoned this to this, or we shouldn't have done this, or got swept up in the broad brush. Well, I think there's a lot of things that got swept up in the broad brush that nobody really knows about. And unless we get it addressed, it's going to continue to cause foment. And so I wanted to just flag it as an issue. It's part of the Title 18. It's part of the strategic plan. Thought I better let you know about it right now because you said I'd like to hear about any kind of outstanding issues or challenges, and I think it could be one. It is one for me. So thank you.
I understand. Without getting too far afield, your agenda on the 28th will include, as part of the agenda item that I discussed previously in terms of the ranking from the body on which of the parked items would be prioritized. There is a draft work program for this reconciliation, so you can see all of the details that would go into it and what resources and what the timeline looks like.
Okay. Well, just a final word on it. It was just, to my knowledge, we hear this word kind of staff driven. It made sense to some people that were doing planning, but I'm not sure it made sense to the people sitting on the ground. And that's where the disconnect, I think, is. It theoretically might be a right, good thing, but the practicality of it is where the challenge is. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you so much. Councilwoman Breckus.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just really looking for next steps. I feel over the last year that we've not been really good as a body in firming up what our motions are. I think there's been times where I thought a motion was something and it wasn't. There's times when other people, I think I've noticed, thought a motion was a motion and it wasn't. So, this is really a manager item. So I'd like to understand what he understands from how that slide deck implements into the next phase, what direction he feels he has from us. I mean, it sounds like this Title 18 stuff that Ms. Stewart was speaking about, which has been a big priority of mine also, is, going off on its own avenue with a staff report that maybe takes it into more detail, and that's good. I just, where are we going from here?
So where I understand we're going from here, Councilmember Breckus, is we are going to go and do the foundational work that we need to do to put these plans on track to implementation. The Title 18 work, I think, is probably a pretty good example in that there is, of course, more on that list than can reasonably be achieved in a year. And so what we are looking to council for guidance on at the next meeting is of that list or of things that perhaps you don't see on the list, but you'd like to see prioritized in Title 18, what would you have staff work on? And then staff will build the work plan and will implement those policy issues. They will come back to you as necessary. And so I think, one of the primary issues that we've had, one of the, for lack of a better phrase, right? One of the reasons that plans gather dust is they don't get reduced to a work plan. And they don't get reduced to a work plan because the foundational level policy work doesn't get done beyond just here's the plan. And so when it comes to turning the plan into action, that's the foundation we need to lay. So what I understand here is, sort of the path forward on the foundational elements of these strategic plans is a thing that the council's is acceptable to the council for staff to focus on over the next year or two. And we're going to do it through the lens that was presented today. I don't know that there's necessarily council direction to be had from that as we go to actual prioritization of specific elements of those strategic plan. Then I think, yes, we'll be back to council with a recommendation, but obviously that's council's bus to drive.
So I guess just to continue that So we got this slide deck, and you had something where December, 22, you're going to do the facilities plan.
Mhm.
So it's just going to live in the slide deck, and you're going to tell us this does that. When you bring items forward to us, or during budget, you'll say, this is the resources to do that.
So certainly during budget, we will say this is the resources to accomplish these goals. I don't believe that it will live in the slide deck. What will happen here is we will generate, I hate the term dashboard, but again, for lack of a better one in this moment, we will develop a device by which we can measure progress on these goals in real time, and you'll see where we're at with respect to both developing the policy and where you can expect to see discussion points on implementation.
Okay, so dashboards are nice. They're interactive, and they live somewhere.
Well, I'd like to jump in, and I do believe that will we see at certain meetings an update, or as we approach one area that you're talking about hearing, or will, and I can't put my words here. I just want to know if, for example, if there's a project that we are working on, you'll come to us and say, okay, this is part of our strategic planning, and we are going to ask you to prioritize this particular issue. I mean, we're not going to do it all. You've got it planned out. We've got this, and you're going to have, like you said, that the dashboard. But how will we individually, how will we as a group, as the council, be able to prioritize or to get these things into the dashboard?
Well, so sort of
I
the
don't
way
know
I look at, the way I look at this is that we have sort of a suite of strategic planning documents, and we will measure progress against each of those. And where things within those individual plans need to be prioritized, we'll ask the council for guidance. The body as a whole will make the decision on prioritization, and then the staff will develop a work plan. We'll show you what those metrics are, what those timelines look like, and what those resources are. I think it, sort of the overarching theme that I'm picking up on today is we can do a better job communicating with the public, engaging the public, and we can do a better job of sort of explaining how all the pieces fit together within the framework that was laid out in those strategic planning documents. And so one of our obligations or responsibilities as staff is to flag those things for you and let you know how they fit and why those cogs are important to the machine.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Exactly. And I like that you were talking about the body will prioritize. So, meaning the council, I would assume. So, thank you.
Yes.
Is there anyone else? I don't believe so. Mr. Manager, do you want to, I think you just did, but would you like to you just recapped, so I'll throw it over to you.
Well, I think just a quick vignette to say how incredibly excited I am, and I know the staff is, to get started on these things that will be, I expect, transformational for our region. I don't want to overlook Mayor Sheevy's comments. I think she is, of course, right in terms of we've done a lot of good things for the community, and we can do a much better job of telling that story and making sure that the efforts of the council and the organization as a whole are more well known. And I think, largely because of those efforts, we've weathered the storm of the last year plus better than we might otherwise have fared. And so, it's really hopeful, I think, to be able to look at that and say, man, those pieces went into place a decade ago and they paid dividends in this event. And that's what we're looking at, right? We're looking at how do we build a framework? How do we put the pieces in place to encourage a sustainable and equitable community here in the biggest little city? So I am thrilled to be part of it. I know our staff is excited to get started. And I expect you all are as well. Thank you for your time today and your attention. We appreciate it.
Thank you all so much. I mean, and thank you, Mr. Manager, and your staff, and each of my council members. I just want to say thank you. It is such an honor to be able to work with you all, and you all do such a great job. And I just had to say that because it really means a lot. We don't always agree. And I know that we can look at each other and go, we don't always agree, but the best part is that we all try to, work with each other and understand. And I love working with you also. I appreciate it. And I know the mayor and everyone else, I know you feel the same. So thank you. See you tomorrow.
Wait, Madam Vice Mayor, if we can just
wait.
state for
Oh,
the
yes,
record that there's,
Oh, sorry.
don't worry, I won't let you leave. We have no general closing public comment, and there's no action necessary on the previous item. So now you may go for a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, motion and accepted. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries unanimously. Thank you all.
Thank you. Now we'll see you tomorrow.